The room is quiet now. You can feel it. The particular stillness that arrives after a long day, when the house has settled and the light has gone, and there is nothing left to do but lie here. Your body is heavier than you realized. The pillow holds you. The blanket holds you. The dark holds you. And yet, somewhere behind your eyes, something is still moving. A conversation you replayed, a task that went unfinished, a small worry that has been waiting all day for exactly this moment, the moment when everything else goes quiet, to make itself heard. Tonight we stay with that, not to fight it, not to fix it, just to sit with a man who understood it better than almost anyone who has ever lived. His name was Marcus Aurelius. He ruled the Roman Empire for nearly 2 decades. He commanded armies, settled disputes, managed famines, and endured the deaths of people he loved. He was the most powerful person on earth. And every night, before sleep came, he sat with his thoughts and wrote them down. Not for us, for himself. A private conversation with his own mind. The notebook he kept would eventually be called the Meditations. No chapter numbers, no audience, no argument building toward a conclusion. Just a man, late at night, working through what it means to live with some degree of peace inside a world that will not cooperate. He failed sometimes. He grew impatient with the people around him. He worried. He rehearsed things he wished he had said. He woke before dawn and struggled to get out of bed. He was not a saint. He was a person like you, trying to find the last thought before sleep that would not ache. There are 2 kinds of wakefulness at night. The first kind is familiar, restlessness. The mind running calculations, trying to solve something. But there is a second kind. We will come back to it. It is quieter, and it is the one Marcus Aurelius spent his life learning to reach. Pierre Hadot, the French philosopher who devoted decades to studying the Stoics, wrote that Marcus did not treat philosophy as a theory. He treated it as a practice, a set of exercises performed daily, especially in the evening, to prepare the mind for rest and reset it for morning. Hadot called these spiritual exercises. Not spiritual in any mystical sense, spiritual in the sense of attending to the inner life as seriously as you attend to the outer one. Tonight, we follow Marcus through one evening. We stay close to what he actually thought, what he actually struggled with, and what he actually found at the far end of the struggle. There is something specific he did in the last 30 seconds before sleep, not a ritual he invented. A practice Epictetus, his philosophical teacher, though the 2 never met, had described decades earlier. We will get there. For now, just this. The room, the dark, the weight of your body settling into the bed that holds it. You have made it through another day. Let your shoulders drop. Whatever is still moving behind your eyes, let it move. You do not have to stop it. You just have to stop following it. That is where we begin. Chapter 2, Marcus Aurelius at Night. It is the year 170 AD, the Danube River. Marcus Aurelius is inside a tent on the northern frontier of the empire, far from Rome, far from the marble corridors of the Palatine Hill where he spent his childhood. The temperature is below freezing. Outside, legions of soldiers are encamped across miles of flatlands. The campaign against the Marcomanni has been grinding on for years. Men have died, more will die. Inside the tent, a lamp is burning. Marcus is writing, not dispatches, not strategy. A letter to himself that begins. Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial. This is how a Roman emperor prepared for his day. By expecting difficulty, by deciding before anything had happened that he would meet it with equanimity. But that was the morning exercise. The evening was different. Seneca, writing nearly a century before Marcus was born, described the practice he had learned from a philosopher named Sextius. Each night, Sextius would ask himself 3 questions before sleep. What weakness did I overcome today? How am I better? What virtue did I practice? Not a performance review. Not a punishment. A quiet inventory conducted with the same calm with which a doctor reviews the day's cases. Interested, attentive, without judgment that bleeds into shame. Marcus adapted this. His version, scattered through the Meditations, reads more like a man catching himself mid-thought than a man following a formal procedure. He would notice something in himself, irritability, a flash of vanity, a moment of self-pity, and hold it up to the light, not to flagellate himself, to understand. Donald Robertson, the cognitive therapist and author of How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, spent years tracing the relationship between Stoic practice and modern cognitive behavioral therapy. He found the overlap was not accidental. The Stoics had discovered, 2,000 years before the clinical trials, that the way you talk to yourself in the evening shapes the quality of your sleep and the character of your morning. What you rehearse before sleep, you rehearse toward. Marcus understood this not as a philosophical position, but as lived experience. He had watched his own mind in the tent. He had felt the difference between an evening spent replaying grievances and an evening spent quietly releasing them. The releasing was not natural, it was practiced. Breathe for a moment. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. Marcus Aurelius was not born serene. He was trained toward it slowly over decades. His teacher Epictetus, a man born into slavery, freed in his 30s, who lost everything a person could lose and still taught contentment, had written that peace was not a gift. It was a discipline, practiced daily, strengthened over time, available to anyone willing to do the work. The work at night was small, a few minutes of honest attention, a question held gently, not gripped. Then sleep. Marcus did not always succeed. The Meditations show us a man who sometimes had to write the same instruction to himself 3 times in the same week. You have power over your mind, not outside events. And then, days later, you have power over your mind, not outside events. And then again, he was not repeating because he had forgotten. He was repeating because this is how a practice works. You do not master equanimity. You practice it every day until the night arrives when you practice it for the last time. And even then, you will have been practicing. Tonight, we are practicing with him. Chapter 3. Why evenings reveal the mind. Something happens to the mind after dark. The psychologist Ethan Kross, in his research on what he calls chatter, the relentless inner monologue that runs beneath conscious thought, found a consistent pattern. The volume turns up at night. Not because the mind becomes more troubled after dark, but because the day's noise has fallen away. You were busy. The busyness was, among other things, a form of management. Screens, conversations, tasks, the low-grade pressure of being required somewhere, all of it kept the inner monologue at a manageable distance. Now there is nothing between you and it. This is not a problem. It is a revelation. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Book 4 of the Meditations, "Confine yourself to the present." He wrote this to himself at night. He was not telling himself to be cheerful about the present. He was telling himself to stop time traveling, backward into what had already happened, forward into what had not yet come, and to stay in the room. The room was enough. It was, in fact, all there was. The Greek word for this in Stoic philosophy is prosoch, attention. Pierre Hadot again translates it as attention to oneself, a continuous wakefulness to one's own inner states, neither ignoring them nor being swept away by them. The Stoics practiced prosoche as a daily discipline, morning and evening, and considered it the foundation of everything else. Without attention, you cannot see what you are doing. Without seeing what you are doing, you cannot change it. And without the capacity to change, you are simply being lived by habit, by reflex, by the accumulated weight of other people's expectations. Marcus Aurelius spent the evenings paying attention. What had he done today that he wished he had done differently? He asked this not with cruelty, but with curiosity. What had he thought that had made things harder? What had he believed in the heat of a moment that he did not actually believe in the cool of the evening? Here is the thing evening reveals: the gap between the person you are performing and the person you actually are. During the day, the performance has momentum. You are the senator, the parent, the employee, the reliable one, the one who does not complain. The role holds you in its shape. At night, the role releases its grip. And in that release, if you are paying attention, you find something not always comfortable, but always more honest than anything that happened in the daylight. Irvin Yalom, the American existential psychiatrist, wrote in The Gift of Therapy that the most important thing a therapist could do was help a patient become more aware of their moment-to-moment experience. Not their history, not their patterns, their immediate experience. Right now, in this room, in this body. The evening does this without asking. If you are lying in the dark and something is there, a tightness in the chest, a low hum of unease, a thought that keeps returning, that is not a symptom of a troubled mind. That is a mind doing its job, showing you what you carried without knowing you were carrying it. Marcus did not flee these revelations. He sat with them, and then, in the writing, he slowly softened them, not resolved. Softened. There is a difference that matters. Let your jaw loosen. Nothing you hear tonight asks anything of you. The evening reveals, but it also releases. Both happen in the same dark room, in the same quiet, if you let them run their course. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, is said to have told his students that they had been given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Apply this inward. Listen to what your mind is saying tonight, all of it, before you try to answer back. The answer, when it comes, will be quieter than the question. Chapter 4, 30 Seconds of Return. Here is what Marcus Aurelius actually did. Not the philosophy, the practice. The thing you could do tonight, in the dark, in 30 seconds, that the Stoics called the most important exercise of the day. Epictetus described it in the Enchiridion. Before sleep, before the mind surrenders to dreams, turn your attention inward and ask, what impression did I act on today? Did I act on what was mine to act on, or on something outside my control? He called this the review of impressions. An impression, in Stoic language, is the raw material of thought, the automatic report the mind generates when something happens. The email arrives and the impression forms. This is threatening. The comment is made at the table and the impression forms. This person is dismissing me. The silence at the end of the phone call and the impression forms something is wrong. The impression is not reality. It is the mind's first translation of reality. And, like all translations, it can be wrong. What the Stoics noticed, and what 2,000 years of subsequent psychology has confirmed, is that we rarely examine our impressions. We take them for facts. We act from them. We build elaborate emotional structures on top of them. And we never go back to check whether the foundation was solid. The 30-second practice is this. Before sleep, take 1 impression from the day. Just 1. The one that stayed with you. The one that is probably still there, humming faintly beneath everything else. Hold it. Look at it. Ask, is this mine? Not in the sense of ownership, in the sense of jurisdiction. Was this something I had the capacity to affect? Or was it something that happened in the world, in someone else's mind, in circumstances I did not create, that I have been treating as if it were mine to solve? Marcus Aurelius wrote in Book 6 of the Meditations, if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment. The power to revoke. Not the power to make the thing disappear. Not the power to pretend it did not happen. The power to change your estimate of it, to hold it differently. This is not denial. Denial is refusing to see the thing at all. This is revision, looking clearly, and then choosing how much weight to assign. James Stockdale, the American naval officer who spent 7 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam, carried Epictetus into the prison camp. Not the physical book which had been taken from him, but the ideas he had memorized at the Naval War College. He later wrote that the Stoic distinction between what is ours and what is not was the difference between survival and collapse. Not optimism, not hope, just this: knowing what you can control and refusing to suffer for what you cannot. The dark room where you lie now is not a prison, but the mind sometimes makes it one by insisting that what is outside your control must somehow be submitted to, fixed, resolved, before sleep is permitted. Tonight, 30 seconds. One impression from the day. Hold it. Ask, is this mine to carry? If the answer is no, and often it is, set it down. Not forever. Set it down for the night. It will still be there in the morning if you need to pick it back up. But the morning Marcus will be steadier than the midnight Marcus. The morning you will be better equipped than the midnight you. The Stoics were not asking you to solve anything before sleep. They were asking you to stop pretending that sleeplessness is the solution. Feel the breath in your chest. Let it soften. One impression, one question. And then, slowly, the weight of the day begins to rearrange itself. This is what Marcus did. In the tent, by the lamplight, this is what he found at the end of it. Not peace, exactly. Something more durable. Permission. Chapter 5. What you can actually control. Marcus Aurelius wrote it plainly in Book 2 of the Meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The line is famous. It has been printed on coffee mugs and stitched onto throw pillows and shared 1,000 times by people who found it on a motivational account, which means it has been almost entirely stripped of its meaning, because Marcus was not offering comfort when he wrote this. He was issuing a challenge. He was the Emperor of Rome. If anyone had power over outside events, it was him. He commanded the largest standing army in the world. He could order the death of a senator by mid-afternoon, and yet he wrote this. Not once, repeatedly, because he knew from direct experience that the power to command armies does not translate into the power to command outcomes. Wars do not end when you want them to end. Plagues, and there was a plague, the Antonine Plague, which killed millions during his reign, do not spare cities because the emperor has personally requested it. Sons die. Trusted friends betray. Governors you appointed make decisions you would not have made. The external world simply does not cooperate. Epictetus, in the opening lines of the Enchiridion, A handbook of Stoic practice that Marcus almost certainly knew makes the same distinction from the opposite direction. He was not an emperor. He had been a slave. His original owner, a man named Epaphroditus, is said to have twisted Epictetus's leg until it broke, simply to demonstrate that he could. Epictetus, in the telling, looked at him calmly and said, "You are going to break it. When the leg snapped, I told you so." Whether this story is literally true matters less than what it illustrates. A man had found something in himself that could not be taken, even when everything else could be. The dichotomy of control, what is mine, what is not a comfortable philosophy. It requires you to look at every source of your suffering and ask, am I suffering for something I can change or something I cannot? If you can change it, stop suffering and start acting. If you cannot change it, stop suffering, because the suffering is the only part of this situation that you are adding to it. This sounds brutal in summary. In practice, it is the most compassionate thing Marcus Aurelius ever wrote. Because most of what keeps us awake at night belongs to the second category, not the crisis we must address. Those, oddly, tend not to prevent sleep. We are built for urgency. What keeps us awake is the middling anxiety, the unresolvable rehearsal, the conversation that cannot be fixed tonight because the other person is asleep, the possibility that something might go wrong in a future that does not yet exist. Bessel van der Kolk, in The Body Keeps the Score, writes that the nervous system does not distinguish between real threat and imagined threat. The body responds to the anxious thought at midnight, as if the thing the thought describes is happening now. Heart rate rises, cortisol spikes, muscles brace for a threat that does not exist. The Stoic practice is not to stop the thought. It is to examine the thought, trace it to its source, and discover that what it calls a threat is most often something outside your control, which means, in Stoic terms, something that does not require your suffering. You cannot fix it tonight. Not because you are powerless, because the night is not the place for fixing. The night is the place for releasing, for asking which burdens are yours to carry and which you have been holding on behalf of a world that did not ask you to. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. Marcus Aurelius understood, by the time he was writing in the tent on the Danube, that the empire would outlast him, that it would also eventually fall, that every decision he made would be second-guessed by someone who was not there, that the wars he fought would be won and then eventually lost by someone else. And none of that changed what he needed to do in the morning. He controlled his attention, his judgments, his effort. Everything else was practice. Chapter 6. Releasing the day's residue. Seneca had a word for it, not the word we would use. His language was Latin, and the concept he was reaching for had no single translation. But what he described in letter 83 of the letters to Lucilius was something like this: the events of the day leave traces, not memories exactly. residue. The emotional texture of what happened clings to the mind the way smoke clings to fabric. You carry it home. You carry it to bed. You lie in the dark, and the day is still on you. Seneca's prescription was not to ignore this. He was not an advocate for emotional suppression. He was an advocate for what he called the evening examination, a deliberate, gentle, unhurried review of the day's events, conducted with the same distance a historian might bring to events that happened long ago. This is harder than it sounds, because the events did not happen long ago. They happened this morning, this afternoon, an hour ago. But Seneca's insight was that the quality of your attention changes how recent the past feels. If you engage with today's events as an involved participant, still arguing the case, still trying to win the argument, still rehearsing what you should have said, they remain immediate, burning. If you shift your attention to observer, watching what happened from a slight remove, noting it without re-entering it, the distance appears. Marcus Aurelius practiced this shift in the Meditations by writing in second person about himself. He addressed himself as you, not I feel angry, but you are angry, not I am distressed by this, but you are distressed by this. This linguistic move is not accidental. Ethan Kross, in his research on self-distancing, found that this exact technique, referring to yourself by name or in second person during self-reflection, reduces emotional intensity. It creates a small gap between the experiencing self and the observing self. And in that gap, things that felt urgent begin to feel simply true. True, but not requiring your suffering. A story from Marcus's circle. The philosopher Rusticus, one of Marcus's teachers, who gave him a copy of Epictetus's writings, is said to have taught him this: before responding in anger to anything, pause. Not for long, just long enough for the first impression to pass. The first impression is almost always colored by threat, by pride, by some older story you are still telling. The second impression is usually closer to reality. The night is the time of second impressions. The day you thought you lived, reviewed quietly in the dark, turns out to be slightly different from the day you actually lived. Quieter in some places, heavier in others. Some of the things that felt catastrophic at 3 inches the afternoon are simply small by 11 at night. And some of the things you rushed past, a kindness someone showed you, a moment of unexpected beauty, the way the light moved in the window, become, in the evening, the things that mattered most. Notice your breath. You don't need to change it. Chrysippus, the Stoic philosopher who systematized much of what Zeno had taught, wrote that the passions, fear, desire, pleasure, pain, are not emotions in the modern sense. They are judgments. Assessments the mind makes about the value of things. And because they are judgments, they can be revised. Not suppressed, revised. The releasing that happens in a good evening review is not the releasing of emotions by force, It is the releasing of the judgment underneath the emotion. The assessment that this thing that happened to you was either more important or more threatening or more permanent than it actually was. Release the assessment. The emotion, lacking its scaffolding, softens on its own. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "Today I escaped from anxiety," or no, I discarded it because it was within me, in my own perceptions, not outside. Not escaped. Discarded. There is a precision there. Escape implies that the thing pursuing you is real and external. Discard implies that you were carrying it yourself, which means you can also set it down. The day's residue is yours to carry only if you choose to carry it past tonight. The physician Galen, who attended Marcus Aurelius for years, observed that the quality of a patient's sleep was directly related to the quality of their evening mental state. Not an insight that required modern neuroscience, just a careful man watching what happened to people at night. The ones who ruminated carried the rumination into their bodies. The ones who found a way before sleep to release the mental grip of the day, these were the ones who woke with something closer to readiness. Galen was not prescribing philosophy. But what he described matched almost exactly what Marcus Aurelius was practicing a few rooms away. You don't have to. Chapter 7, Anxiety Shrinks in Perspective. Marcus Aurelius had a practice he called the view from above. He described it in several places in the Meditations. A deliberate act of imagination in which he would lift his mind's eye out of the immediate situation and look down at it from a great height, not from arrogance, from perspective. The argument in the Senate that had consumed the morning. Imagine it from 1,000 feet. Senators in their togas, the chamber, the city around it, the empire around the city, the centuries before and after. The argument, viewed from there, was still real, still had consequences, but it occupied a different proportion of the whole. Pierre Hadot wrote that this exercise, which he called the view from above, was one of the most distinctive Stoic practices and one of the most psychologically sophisticated. Long before modern research on cognitive distancing, the Stoics had discovered that the size of a problem is partly a function of the size of the frame you put around it. Expand the frame, the problem does not disappear, but it shrinks to its actual size. Tonight, try it with whatever is still moving in your mind. The situation at work, the health concern, the thing someone said, the money. Hold it where it is. Now expand outward. Your street, your city, the continent, the planet, seen from space, as the astronauts describe seeing it, a blue sphere with no visible borders, small and quiet in an enormous dark. Your difficulty is still there. It is real. It matters. And it is also small in the largest sense of scale available to you. The Stoics were not trying to diminish your problems by doing this. They were trying to help you see them accurately, because we almost never see our problems accurately. We see them through the magnifying lens of proximity. They are very close, and so they appear very large. Marcus Aurelius in Book 9 of the Meditations wrote, "How many a Chrysippus, how many a Socrates, how many an Epictetus have time already swallowed up?" This sounds grim. It is not, in context, grim. It is liberating. Every person who ever lived, the most brilliant, the most powerful, the most beloved, has passed through this world and left it. Not even the greatest ideas have survived entirely intact. The Stoic school itself was eventually absorbed, misremembered, and only partially reconstructed. And yet, those who lived by its principles found lives worth living, not because they were important in the sweep of history, because they were fully present in the moments they had. Anxiety is, at its core, a failure of perspective, not a character flaw, a cognitive habit. The mind zooms in on a threat and stays there, unable to pull back, unable to see that the threat, while real, is one small element of a much larger picture that also contains quiet, beauty, safety, and rest. Kierkegaard wrote that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom. The Stoics agreed in their own way. Anxiety emerges from the gap between what is and what we believe should be. Close that gap not by changing the world, but by revising the belief, and the dizziness lessens. Marcus closed the gap by looking at things from very far away and very long ago. A military campaign that had gone badly. Viewed from a century later, it was one campaign among thousands. Not a failure of the emperor. A feature of a world that does not give emperors everything they ask for. Your difficult week. Viewed from 1 year from tonight, it is part of a larger story you cannot yet read. It may be the week that led to something better. It may be a week you have entirely forgotten. You do not know yet. That uncertainty, which feels threatening when you are inside it, becomes spacious when you step back. Let your body settle deeper into whatever holds you. Anxiety shrinks when you stop feeding it closeness. It does not disappear. It shrinks, and in the space it vacates, the mind finds room to breathe. Chapter 8. The Breath of Stoic Attention. There is a line in Book 2 of the Meditations that most translators render as something like, "Confine yourself to the present." But the Greek underneath that translation is more physical. The word Marcus uses is prosechein, to attach. The instruction is not merely think about the present. It is attach yourself to the present. Hold it the way you hold something that matters. This is not mindfulness in the modern wellness sense, a passive, floating attention. This is the active decision to be here, now, fully, instead of somewhere else in time. The Stoics made this decision with their breath. Not the elaborate breathwork of yoga or meditation traditions, simply noticing the breath as an anchor, feeling it arrive and depart, recognizing in that rhythm that the body is doing what it needs to do without your instruction. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese Zen monk, described this in The Miracle of Mindfulness. Feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky. Conscious breathing is my anchor. The language is different from Marcus Aurelius. The discovery is the same. The breath is always happening now. When you attend to the breath, you are in the present by definition. You cannot breathe in the past, you cannot breathe in the future. The breath only exists here, in this body, in this room, in this moment. Marcus Aurelius did not write much explicitly about the breath, but the practice he describes, catching himself mid-drift, returning to the present moment, noticing the impression and releasing it, implies a physical anchor that makes the return possible. Without a body anchor, the mind drifts endlessly from one thought cluster to another, each one pulling toward a different time. The breath is the body's vote for the present. Epictetus taught something adjacent, that the Stoic practitioner should maintain continuous awareness of their own state, not obsessive self-monitoring, but gentle background attention. An awareness of what is happening inside alongside what is happening outside, so that the inner response can be noticed before it has fully shaped into action. This requires a certain kind of stillness, not the stillness of a frozen person, the stillness of a person who is fully awake to what is happening right now, and therefore not running toward anything or away from anything. You are in bed. The room is dark. The day has happened. Your breath is happening. Right now, there is nothing else that is actually occurring. The worries are thoughts about things not happening right now. The memories are thoughts about things that have already stopped happening. Only the breath is happening, steadily, without needing anything from you. Let your attention rest there. Not forcing it, not demanding it stay. Just, when the mind wanders, as it will, bring it back to the breath the way you would gently redirect a child who has wandered toward something dangerous. No alarm, no frustration, just a calm hand and a quiet, "Come back here." Marcus Aurelius wrote this instruction to himself so many times in the Meditations that you can almost feel him practicing it in the act of writing. The mind wandered to resentment. He caught it. Come back. The mind wandered to ambition. He caught it. Come back. The mind wandered to the fear of death. He caught it, lingered with it, and then gently came back. If your mind has wandered, that is fine. Come back gently. The breath is still here. It will keep happening through the night, whether or not you attend to it. But if you attend to it just for a moment, just for the length of a few slow cycles, something in the nervous system recognizes that nothing is being asked of it right now, and it begins, slowly, to put down its vigilance. That is the breath of Stoic attention, not a technique, an arrival. Chapter 9. Why Overthinking Grows After Dark. If you are still awake right now, this is the part I wanted you to hear. Not because the rest did not matter, because this is the mechanism, the thing actually happening when the mind refuses to rest. Marcus Aurelius noticed it too, though he did not have our language for it. He wrote in the Meditations in Book 5, "Never value anything as profitable to you that will make you break your word, lose your self-respect, hate, suspect, or curse anyone, or to indulge in any action that will make you regret it." He was writing, in part, about the mind's habit of seeking profit in places where profit cannot be found. Overthinking is, at its root, a misguided attempt at control. The mind believes, and this is the error, that if it thinks about the problem long enough, from enough angles, it will eventually arrive at a solution that eliminates uncertainty. And uncertainty, the mind has decided, is the real threat. Not the problem itself, the not knowing. So it thinks, and the thinking feels productive because it feels like action. Something is happening. The mind is working. Surely, eventually, the answer will emerge. It does not emerge. Because most of what we overthink at midnight is not a problem with a solution, it is a condition with a threshold. A condition is something you live with, adapt to, navigate over time. A relationship that requires ongoing attention. A health situation that requires ongoing monitoring. A financial reality that requires ongoing management. These do not resolve, they evolve. And no amount of midnight thinking accelerates the evolution. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." He meant the anticipated suffering, the rehearsed version, the mental simulation of a negative outcome. These consume more of your life than the actual events which arrive once and then become past tense. The mind at midnight is a theater of rehearsals. Every scene features a version of you confronting, a version of a problem that has not yet taken its final shape. And yet, you rehearse. As if rehearsing the confrontation makes the confrontation more survivable. Research on worry from the psychologist Thomas Borkovec, who spent decades studying anxiety, suggests the opposite. Rehearsing negative scenarios does not prepare you for them. It habituates your nervous system to the threat signal. The more you rehearse, the more available the threat response becomes. Not more controlled, more reflexive. Overthinking trains the mind toward overthinking. The Stoic alternative was not positive thinking. It was no thinking about certain categories of things at certain hours. Epictetus put it plainly. Some things are in our power, and some are not. The ones that are not in our power should not occupy our attention, because our attention is all we have to spend, and spending it on things we cannot affect is pure waste. This is not cold-heartedness. It is a kind of conservation. Your energy is finite. Your attention is finite. The night, specifically, is not the time for deploying either of them on problems that cannot be touched until morning. Let your jaw soften. Feel the weight of your body. The philosopher Thomas Borkovec, who spent 40 years studying worry at Penn State, found that the function of worry was not, as most people assume, problem-solving. Worry, he found, was primarily avoidant. It occupied the mind with verbal processing, words, arguments, scenarios, and in doing so prevented the more distressing experience of the emotional content underneath. In other words, we worry to avoid feeling. The relentless planning and rehearsing of midnight is a way of staying in the head, where things feel manageable, and away from the body, where the actual feelings live. Marcus Aurelius would not have known this research. But his practice pointed at the same thing. The evening review, the grounding attention to the breath and the body, the return to what is actually present, these were all ways of descending from the abstract verbal processing of worry into the more honest terrain of, what am I actually feeling? What does this feel like in the body? What is here, beneath the words? The Stoics called this katastatike, the baseline emotional state, the felt sense of things prior to the interpretive overlay. Getting there required going through the worry, not around it. And going through it required the willingness to put down the verbal processing and feel what was underneath. Marcus Aurelius, by the time he was writing on the Danube frontier, had survived the deaths of multiple children, a devastating plague, betrayal by people he trusted, and decades of warfare. He was not a man who had never been given reasons to overthink. He was a man who had decided, through sustained practice, that the overthinking was its own problem, separate from and added to whatever had originally triggered it. The problem stays. The overthinking can go. Not tonight forever, just for tonight. Chapter 10. Judgment creates restlessness. Here is a thing Marcus Aurelius understood about the mind that most of us never fully accept. The restlessness is not caused by what happened. It is caused by the judgment we placed on what happened. Book 8 of the Meditations. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. The word estimate is doing enormous work there. Not reality, not the event, the estimate, your mind's rapid, automatic, largely unconscious assessment of what this thing means. The email arrives. The mind reads it. Then, faster than conscious thought, the mind decides. This is bad. This is a threat. This is a reflection of my worth, or my standing, or my safety. And in that decision, which happens in milliseconds, the emotional response is set. The emotion feels like a response to the email. It is actually a response to the assessment of the email. Marcus Aurelius had a way of checking his assessments at the end of the day. He would take an event that had disturbed him, a person who had acted with bad faith, a situation that had gone badly, and he would strip it of its interpretive layers. What actually happened? Not what it means. What it literally, physically was. A man spoke words I did not like. A plan did not proceed as designed. A person I trusted made a choice I would not have made. Stripped of interpretation, these events are often much smaller than the emotional weight they carry. The disturbance comes from the accumulated judgments layered on top. This means they don't respect me. This means the future is uncertain. This means I was wrong to trust. Judgments that may or may not be accurate, but which arrived instantly and without review. Critic wrote that the Stoic goal was not to eliminate passion, but to ensure that passion was grounded in accurate judgment. If you are angry, the anger should be proportionate to what actually happened, not to your worst interpretation of what might be implied. Most of us, most of the time, are feeling our interpretations rather than our actual experiences. And interpretations compound. The small slight in the morning becomes, by evening, evidence of a pattern. The pattern becomes evidence of a character flaw in the other person or yourself. The character flaw becomes a prediction about the future, and you lie in the dark trying to solve a future constructed from an interpretation of a small thing that happened this morning. Rutilius Rufus, a Roman statesman Marcus admired, was unjustly exiled. He went quietly. He wrote from exile that the injustice was real, but the suffering was his to manage. He could judge the event accurately. It was wrong, it was unfair, without adding the judgment that it was also catastrophic, irreversible, or a reflection of his fundamental worth. The event was what it was. What he did with the assessment of it was his. Notice your breath. You don't need to change it. In bed, in the dark, this practice is available to you. Take whatever judgment is still active, the person who disappointed you, the situation that went wrong, the version of yourself you found lacking today. Hold the judgment separate from the fact. The fact is real and may deserve your attention. The judgment is your invention, and it is available for revision. Not to excuse, not to minimize, just to make it accurate. And accuracy in the quiet of the evening is almost always gentler than the version the anxious mind produced at speed. This is one of the practical gifts of the Stoic evening review, not the correction of wrong behavior, that is the morning's work, the correction of wrong assessment, the revision of the estimate that transformed a manageable difficulty into an overwhelming one. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Book 4, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." The phrase has been simplified into motivational shorthand. In context, it is a precise claim about the relationship between assessment and experience. The way of thinking, the estimates you make, the judgments you apply, is the primary variable. Change the estimate and the experience changes. Not because the facts have changed, because the meaning assigned to the facts has been revised. Tonight, whatever remained charged from the day is available for this revision. Not to make it smaller than it is, to make it accurate. And accurate is, almost always, smaller than the midnight version. Chapter 11, The Body Learns Surrender. There is something the Stoics knew about the body that the modern wellness industry has spent billions trying to rediscover. The body follows the mind, but the mind can also follow the body. Marcus Aurelius did not write extensively about the body's role in equanimity. He was, by temperament and training, primarily a philosopher of the mind. But Galen, the physician who actually treated Marcus Aurelius, who had quarters in the imperial palace and access to the emperor's daily health, wrote extensively about the relationship between mental agitation and physical tension. A man gripping his anger, Galen observed, grips it in his jaw, his shoulders, his chest. The emotional state is not merely mental, It is distributed throughout the musculature. You can see it. You can feel it in another person's handshake, which means releasing the grip of the body can participate in releasing the grip of the mind. Bessel van der Kolk, in The Body Keeps the Score, writes that trauma and chronic stress, which is a milder form of the same physiological process, is held in the body in tight muscles, in a shortened breath, in a chronically braced posture that the nervous system has learned because once being braced was necessary. The work of healing, he argues, often has to go through the body. You cannot always think your way to ease. Sometimes you have to feel your way there. The Stoics would not have used this language, but the practice of grounding, which appears in various forms throughout the ancient philosophical schools, reflects the same understanding. Come back to the body. Feel it. Let it report what it knows. Right now, your body is on a surface that supports it. Feel where the weight lands, the back of your head, your shoulder blades, your lower back, your legs, your heels. Each contact point is the body meeting something solid. The body learns surrender the way any organism learns a new behavior, through repetition, through safety, through the accumulated experience that letting go of tension does not produce danger. You have survived every difficult night before this one. The body knows this. Even when the mind has forgotten it, the body carries the evidence of your survival in every morning you have woken into. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Book 5, "Begin the morning by saying to thyself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial. All these things happen to them by reason of their ignorance of what is good and evil." He prepared the mind by softening the judgment before the events arrived. You can do this in reverse. End the day by saying, "The difficult people I encountered today were struggling with their own ignorance, as I sometimes struggle with mine. We are all attempting to live well with imperfect tools." The judgment loosens. The chest loosens with it. Thich Nhat Hanh, who spent decades in forced exile from his home country, wrote, "The present moment is the only moment available to us, and it is the door to all moments." He was not being poetic. He was being precise. Your body is in this moment. It is not in tomorrow's difficulty or yesterday's wound. It is here, in this room, supported, breathing, warm. The mind will catch up to the body if you give it long enough. Let your hands open. There is nothing to grip. The night will hold what needs to be held. Your only task is to release what it is not yours to carry until morning. Chapter 12. A Mind Without Complaint. There is a chapter in the Meditations, Book 5, Entry 8, that is worth sitting with tonight. Marcus writes about the morning, about the struggle to get out of bed, about the voice that says, "Stay, rest, it is warm here, the work can wait." He argues back, not with aggression, but with a question. If you are doing your proper work, what does it matter that you are cold? What does it matter that you are sleepy? He was not glorifying suffering. He was naming a very specific thing, the complaint, the ongoing narration the mind provides about the gap between conditions as they are and conditions as we would prefer them to be. Cold water, it should be warmer. Difficult people, they should be easier. long days, they should be shorter. This moment, it should be different. The complaint is not always voiced. It runs beneath the surface as a low-grade dissatisfaction, a permanent editorial, a refusal to fully accept the terms of the life one is actually living. Marcus noticed this in himself and found it the most wasteful of all mental habits. Not because complaining is morally wrong, because it accomplishes nothing while consuming everything. It changes neither the conditions complained about nor the person doing the complaining. It simply adds a layer of suffering to whatever suffering already exists. And it is, he noted, entirely optional. Epictetus. Men are disturbed not by the things which happen, but by the opinions about the things. The cold water is just cold water. The opinion that it should be warm is the disturbance. This is, again, not a call for passive acceptance of injustice. Injustice should be named and addressed. But the morning cold, the difficult colleague, the slow traffic, the weather, the fact that bodies age and plans fail, and nothing stays exactly as you want it, these are not injustices. These are the conditions of existing in a world that was not designed around your preferences. The mind that has released the habit of complaint becomes lighter. Not because things are better, because the editorial has stopped running. Zeno of Citium, who founded the Stoic school in Athens around 300 BC, began as a merchant. He was shipwrecked, lost everything, arrived in Athens and, by accident, walked into a bookshop where someone was reading the memorabilia of Socrates. He stayed. Eventually, he began teaching in the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch which gave Stoicism its name. He could have spent his life in complaint about the shipwreck. Instead, he later said the shipwreck was the best thing that happened to him. Not because losing his cargo was good, because the response to the loss, the going forward, the beginning again, turned out to be where his actual life was located. A mind without complaint is not a mind that has decided everything is fine. It is a mind that has decided the narration of dissatisfaction is not useful, and without usefulness, it does not deserve the room it is taking up. Let your jaw soften. Nothing you hear tonight asks anything of you. Whatever the day brought, the things that went wrong, the things that disappointed you, the ways things fell short of what you had hoped, they have ended now. They are past tense, as of this moment. The complaint about them is your choice to continue them. Set the complaint down. Not because you were wrong to feel it, because the feeling has done what it can do, and further feeling now only prevents the rest you need. Marcus Aurelius survived things he had no business surviving with any equanimity at all. He did it, in part, by refusing to add complaint to the list of things he was already carrying. He wrote to himself, "Enough." And then he went to sleep. Chapter 13. The Discipline of Assent. The Stoics had a technical term for something Marcus Aurelius practiced every day: synkatathesis, assent. It sounds abstract. The practice is completely specific. An impression arrives, A thought rises, something happens inside the mind, and then, before anything else, there is a moment. A fraction of a second, which the Stoics believed could be lengthened through practice, in which the mind has not yet responded, in which you are the observer of the impression, not yet the actor of it. In that fraction of a second, you can either assent, agree that the impression accurately represents reality and allow it to drive your response, or you can withhold assent. You can say, "Not yet. Let me look more closely." Epictetus called this the most important discipline available to a human being, more important than courage, because courage without the discipline of assent becomes recklessness. More important than wisdom, because wisdom that cannot pause before an impression becomes mere cleverness deployed in the service of whatever the emotions have already decided. The discipline of assent means inserting deliberateness between the stimulus and the response. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz and founded logotherapy, a form of psychotherapy centered on the search for meaning, wrote something that became one of the most quoted lines in the psychology of resilience. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Frankl arrived at this through experience Marcus Aurelius would have recognized, not through philosophy, but through the extremity of living it. The discipline of assent, practiced in the relative safety of a lamp-lit tent, became, in a concentration camp, the difference between a self that survived and a self that was consumed. Most of us, fortunately, will never need it at that level. But we need it. We need it for the moment an email arrives and the first impression says, "I am under attack." We need it for the moment someone speaks and the first impression says, "I am being dismissed." We need it for the moment the mind presents a nighttime worry, and the first impression says, "This is real, this is happening, this requires your immediate and full attention." The discipline says, "Wait, look at the impression, turn it over. Ask what it is actually made of, and then, only then, decide whether to assent." Marcus Aurelius wrote in Book 9 of the Meditations, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." The word esteem is the key. Esteeming is a form of assent. It is the mind agreeing that this thing has the value it appears to have. The discipline is the willingness to check that appearance before acting on it. In the dark of the bedroom, the discipline of assent works like this. A thought arrives. Maybe familiar, maybe the one that always arrives at this hour. Don't follow it yet, just see it. It is an impression made of words, images, feelings, none of which is the thing it claims to describe. The mind's translation of something real passed through the filter of your history, your fears, your particular way of interpreting the world. You don't have to assent to it tonight. You can say, "I see you. I will look at you more clearly in the morning. For now, I am here, in this room, in this body, which is safe. The impression does not disappear, but it loses its momentum when you refuse to run alongside it. That refusal is the discipline of assent. Marcus practiced it thousands of times across his lifetime. The meditations are, in large part, the record of that practice. Each entry a moment of refusal, a mind catching its own drift and redirecting. You are doing the same thing tonight by staying here. Chapter 14. Naming what is not yours. There is a precise practice in Stoic philosophy that Marcus Aurelius returned to frequently. He called it, in various formulations, marking what belongs to you and what does not. Not in the legal sense, not in the sense of ownership or credit, in the sense of what you are responsible for, what is within your jurisdiction, and what has been mistakenly placed inside your borders. The distinction matters because most of us carry things that were never ours to carry. Other people's moods. We absorb them, adapt to them, sometimes rearrange our entire behavior to manage them. Their moods were not ours to manage, but we took them in. Other people's opinions of us, we rehearse them, argue against them, try to preemptively prove them wrong. Their opinions live in their minds, not in ours, but we granted them residency. Outcomes we could not control. We take responsibility for things that went wrong due to factors outside our influence, as if our not having controlled the uncontrollable is itself a failure. Marcus Aurelius had a phrase he used in the Meditations across multiple entries. This is not mine, followed by this is not in my power, followed by this does not touch me, not as denial, as correct accounting. Epictetus went further. He said that failing to make this distinction, confusing what is ours with what is not, was the source of all human suffering without exception. Not a source, the source. Because when you believe that something not in your control is your responsibility, you are committed to managing a thing you cannot manage. And the impossibility of that task generates suffering, not because you are failing, but because you undertook the impossible in the first place. The naming practice works like this. In the evening, when reviewing the day, take something that disturbed you, not to analyze it, to mark it. Whose was it? If a colleague made a decision you disagreed with, the decision was theirs. Your reaction to the decision is yours. You have jurisdiction over the reaction. You do not have jurisdiction over their decision. If someone spoke unkindly, the words were theirs. What you believe the words mean about your worth is yours. You can revise what you believe. You cannot revise what they said. If something went wrong that you could not have prevented, the outcome was not yours. Your response to the outcome is yours. This sorting is not cold, it is clarifying. Because when you stop carrying what is not yours, you have more capacity for what is. Rusticus, the philosopher who mentored Marcus Aurelius and gave him the copy of Epictetus that shaped his thinking, is said to have counseled patience with people who caused difficulty. Not because they deserved patience, because spending your agitation on them gave them something they had not earned, a portion of your interior life. Name what is theirs, and then, gently, without ceremony, return it to them. You are left with what is actually yours. The response, the attention, the choice of how to proceed. These are manageable. These are, in fact, all that was ever truly yours. This realization does not arrive once and then settle permanently. Marcus Aurelius returned to it dozens of times across the meditations. Each return is evidence not of failure, but of the nature of practice. The mind, left without reminding, drifts back toward its habitual accounting, adding things to the ledger that do not belong there, taking responsibility for outcomes that were never in its jurisdiction. The reminding is the practice, and the reminding, done gently in the dark before sleep, is available to you tonight. Not as a philosophy exercise, as a practical act of returning to what is actually yours and releasing what is not. In the morning, the list of what is yours will be enough. It will include your attention, your effort, your response, your choice of orientation toward whatever the day brings. These are considerable. They are more than enough to build a day on. They do not need to be supplemented by borrowing responsibility from a world that did not ask you to carry it. Let your body settle. In the dark, the things that are not yours tend to feel very heavy. They have been accumulating since morning. Every ambient worry, every half-absorbed stress from the people around you, every imagined assessment of how others saw you today, none of that is yours to lie awake for. Let your shoulders drop. What is yours tonight is simple: the breath, the body, the decision to rest. Everything else can wait in the hallway until morning. If it belongs to you, it will still be there, and you will be better equipped to meet it after sleep. Chapter 15, Mental Clarity Before Midnight. The Stoics believed that clarity, not happiness, not success, not even peace exactly, was the proper aim of the philosophical life. Clarity about what is real, clarity about what is yours, clarity about what matters and what merely appears to matter. Marcus Aurelius returned to this again and again in the Meditations, because he found clarity in his own experience to be the precondition for everything else. A man who did not see clearly could not act well, could not love well, could not lead well, or rest well, or die well. Seeing clearly was the practice, and the peculiar gift of the evening, what Marcus found in the tent, what you may find in the dark of your own room, is that clarity becomes available when the day's noise has fallen away. The Stoic philosopher Cicero, writing in the 1st century BC, described what he called clarity of mind as a kind of internal illumination, not mystical, cognitive. The mind in a state of clear assessment, unfogged by passion, unmoved by appetite, attending steadily to what actually is. He did not think this was a natural state. He thought it was an achievement, hard won, maintained through daily practice. What makes clarity difficult is not stupidity. Most of us are intelligent enough to see our situations clearly. What makes clarity difficult is proximity and involvement. We are inside our situations. We have emotional stakes in the outcomes. We are tired, or worried, or proud, or afraid, in ways that color our perception without our noticing. The evening review is, in part, a practice of creating enough distance to see clearly. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Book 10, "The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane." He did not mean literally insane. He meant the majority of people spend their lives pursuing things that, upon examination, do not produce what they promise. Wealth promises security. Power promises respect. Approval promises belonging. None of these deliver reliably or permanently. The person who has examined these promises, who has held them up to the clear light of honest attention, stops spending their life currency on them. Not because they become ascetic, because they become clear about the exchange rate. Right now, in the dark before midnight, you are already doing something Marcus Aurelius considered the highest form of philosophical practice. You are stopping. You have removed yourself from the forward momentum of the day. You are not producing, not consuming, not performing. You are lying still, in the dark, giving your mind room to see itself. This is not passive. This is the practice. Pierre Hadot wrote that the Stoics considered philosophy a way of life, not a body of doctrine. Not something you studied and then applied. Something you practiced continuously in the texture of your daily existence, including the texture of how you spent the hours before sleep. If you lie awake worrying, you are practicing worrying. The neural pathways of worry strengthen. If you lie still and attend to the body, to the breath, to the clear sight of what is actually yours and what is not, you are practicing clarity. The neural pathways of clarity strengthen. This is not a metaphor. This is how the brain works. What you practice, you become better at. Tonight, in the few minutes before sleep arrives, you are practicing something worth getting better at. Let your jaw loosen. Feel the weight of your body. The room is quiet. The day is over. Nothing more is required of you until morning. This is what clarity feels like when the noise has gone. Chapter 16. Letting go of applause. Marcus Aurelius was the most famous person on earth for nearly 2 decades. His image was on coins. His decisions affected millions. He was celebrated in Rome, in Alexandria, in Antioch, across a territory that stretched from Scotland to Mesopotamia. And he spent a significant portion of the meditations warning himself not to care. Not to care about doing good work. Not to care about whether people approved of the work. There is a passage in Book 6 Inches which he writes about the men of his grandfather's time, men who were in their day celebrated and admired. Where are they now? And the men who admired them, and the men who admired the admirers, all gone. And their reputations with them, not erased exactly, faded, reduced, placed in correct proportion to everything else that exists. This is not cynicism, it is mathematics. The applause of any audience has a half-life. The praise of your colleagues this week will be memory by next year and irrelevant by the decade after. The reputation you are currently working to protect will be contested after you are gone and settled into something simpler once sufficient time has passed. Marcus Aurelius understood this not as a reason for despair, but as a reason for freedom. If the applause has such a short life, why arrange your inner life around it? Why hollow out your evenings rehearsing whether you were sufficiently impressive today? Why lie awake running calculations about how you were perceived, what impression you made, whether the silence in the room after you spoke meant approval or dismissal? The Stoics called this the tyranny of opinion, doxa, public estimation. And they considered it one of the primary sources of human unhappiness, not because other people's opinions are not real, but because the mind that organizes itself around those opinions has surrendered the only authority that actually belongs to it. Epictetus, who had no reputation to protect and no audience who cared what he thought, wrote more freely about this than Marcus could. He said, "Never depend on the admiration of others. There is no strength in it. Personal merit cannot be derived from an external source. The strength that comes from others' admiration is borrowed. What is borrowed must eventually be returned, and the returning is always painful. The strength that comes from knowing clearly that you acted well today, regardless of whether anyone noticed, is yours." Donald Robertson, tracing the Stoic influence on modern psychology, notes that this principle maps almost exactly onto what psychologists call intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation, acting because the act itself aligns with your values, is durable and restorative. Extrinsic motivation, acting in order to be seen acting, is fragile and exhausting. You know this distinction in your body. The days when you worked hard at something that mattered to you and it went unacknowledged, and you still felt the quiet satisfaction of having done it. That is intrinsic motivation. The days when you were praised for something you knew was not your best work, the subtle hollowness of that is extrinsic motivation, returning an insufficient dividend. Tonight, you don't need to be applauded for what you did. If your mind has been running that calculation, reviewing the day for signals of approval, cataloguing the moments of recognition and their absence, you can stop. The review is over. You acted today with the tools and the clarity you had available. Whatever the audience thought, the act is finished and belongs to the past. Let the applause and its absence go with it. Your worth tonight is not determined by anything that was said about you today. Let your body settle into that. Chapter 17. The Fear Beneath Busyness. There is something your mind has been working around for a long time. Not the worries you can name, the one underneath them. Marcus Aurelius circled it in the Meditations without always naming it directly. He wrote about the men who filled every hour, the politicians, the merchants, the generals, who, when stillness arrived, became anxious without knowing why. Who moved quickly from one obligation to the next, not because the obligations required such speed, but because the speed itself was serving a purpose. The purpose was not stopping, because stopping meant sitting with something that had no name. Seneca, in On the Shortness of Life, wrote about the man who retires and then discovers he has no idea how to simply be. The man who filled his life with tasks and meetings and obligations suddenly finds that without them, he does not know what he is for. The busyness was not just productivity, it was identity. And beneath the identity, the fear. Without the busyness, what am I? This is not a modern anxiety, though it wears modern clothes. Marcus Aurelius felt it. A man who was emperor from the age of 39 had very little practice simply being Marcus rather than being the emperor. Every hour was someone else's hour. Every meal a potential counsel. Even the private retreat at night, writing in the journal, conducting the evening review, was Marcus performing a kind of philosophical duty toward himself. Was there, beneath all of that, a person who simply existed? Irvin Yalom wrote, in Staring at the Sun, that one of the most common but least discussed human fears is not the fear of death itself, but the fear of insignificance. The fear that without the accomplishments, without the titles, without the ongoing performance of a useful and valued self, there is nothing there. The busyness is the performance of significance. And the night, when the performance stops, forces the question. The question is not comfortable, but it is not as terrible as the avoidance of it. Because what lies on the other side of the question, if you are willing to sit with it rather than flee, is not emptiness. It is something more like a self that has always been there, waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice it. A self that does not need the job title to exist, does not need the applause, does not need to be useful to anyone. That is the self Marcus Aurelius was trying to find in the late-night writing, the Marcus beneath the emperor, the person inside the performance. He found it imperfectly across years of practice. The fear beneath busyness is real, and it does not need to be solved tonight. It only needs to be acknowledged. You are here. The room is quiet. Nothing is being asked of you, and you are still here. That is enough. Let your shoulders drop. The fear has been working very hard to keep itself hidden beneath the activity of your days. It can rest now, too. You don't have to fix it tonight. You don't have to name it perfectly. Just notice that it is there, and that its presence does not mean something is wrong with you. It means you are paying attention. And that is, as Marcus Aurelius spent his life discovering, the beginning of everything. Donald Winnicott, the British psychoanalyst, described what he called the capacity to be alone, not the circumstance of being alone, but the internal capacity to tolerate one's own company without demanding that something happen or be resolved. He considered this capacity one of the most important indicators of psychological maturity. And he noted carefully that many people who appeared perfectly functional in the world had never developed it. They were fine when busy. They struggled when still. The night reveals this. Not cruelly, honestly. If the stillness is uncomfortable tonight, if the absence of the day's structure feels like a kind of falling, that is not evidence of damage. It is evidence of unfamiliarity. And unfamiliarity, practiced toward, becomes familiarity. Marcus Aurelius spent years learning to be alone with himself. The meditations are the record of that practice, a man discovering slowly that the company of his own honest attention was not something to flee. It was eventually the company he trusted most. Chapter 18: Desire and the Sleepless Mind. The Stoics divided the passions, the emotional states that could destabilize the mind, into 4 categories: pleasure, pain, fear, desire. Of these 4, they considered desire the most insidious at night. Not because desire is morally wrong, because desire is, by definition, oriented towards something that does not yet exist. It is a forward-leaning emotion. It pulls the mind out of the present and into an imagined future in which the desired thing has been obtained. And at midnight, when there is nothing to be done about the thing desired, this forward lean produces a particular kind of restlessness. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Book 9, "Confine yourself to the present." He was writing against the pull of desire, not sensory desire particularly, but the broader appetite the mind develops for outcomes not yet arrived. The promotion, the resolution of the difficult situation, the return of someone who has been distant, the day when the body feels well again, the moment when the financial pressure finally lifts. These are all real desires. Some of them are legitimate and good. None of them can be satisfied tonight. And the mind that has not practiced the discipline of return back to the present, back to the body, back to what is actually here, will spend the night reaching forward into a future that does not exist, feeling the gap between now and then as a kind of pain. Critic, in his account of the passions, wrote, "That desire of this kind is not just unpleasant, it is self-defeating. Because the future you are reaching toward, once arrived, will generate a new future to reach toward. The mechanism of desire does not stop at satisfaction, it relocates. The man who desires the promotion desires, once he has it, the better position above that one. The person who desires relief from a difficulty desires, once the difficulty has passed, the assurance that it will not return. Desire points always ahead, and ahead is always not now. The practice is not the elimination of desire. Marcus did not advocate for that, and it is not possible anyway. The practice is the containment of desire within appropriate hours. During the day, desire is fuel. It motivates. It directs effort toward things that matter. At night, desire is noise. It revs without traction, the engine running with nowhere to go. The Stoic evening practice included a quieting of desire, not by suppressing it, by acknowledging it and setting it aside. I want this. I cannot have it tonight. Tomorrow I can work toward it. Tonight I release it back to the future where it lives. Lao Tzu, in the Tao Te Ching, put a version of this in different language. To the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders. Not surrenders as in submits to your power. Surrenders as in opens to your perception. The still mind does not receive less. It receives more clearly. What you actually have tonight in this room, safety, warmth, the functioning of a body that is carrying you through decades of existence, these things are difficult to perceive through the static of desire for what is not here. When the desire quiets, you can feel what is actually present. And what is present, for most people reading in a warm bed in a safe room, is considerably more than the mind under the influence of desire will allow you to notice. Notice your breath. The breath is present. Not desired, not imagined. Here, let it remind you of the category of things that are actually yours tonight. Marcus Aurelius, in Book 2 of the Meditations, described the practice of beginning each day by attending to the body before attending to the mind, not as a wellness routine, as a philosophical anchor. The body, he wrote, is always in the present. It cannot be in yesterday or tomorrow. It is here. Breathing, warm or cold, heavy or light, responding to what is actually occurring. The mind runs ahead and behind. The body stays. Attending to the body, to the breath, to the weight of the limbs, to the particular feeling of the surface that holds you, is a way of joining the body in the present, of returning from wherever the mind has been to where the body has always been. Here, now, this breath, that is your category. That is what belongs to tonight. Everything else, the plans and worries and regrets and anticipations, are residents of other times. They have no lease on this particular hour. Let the breath remind you that this is the only hour you actually inhabit. Chapter 19, Inner Peace Through Restraint. Marcus Aurelius was not a peaceful person by temperament. This is important. It is easy to read the Meditations and imagine a man who was naturally serene, whose equanimity was a gift of character, not a discipline of years. The text contradicts this at every turn. He wrote reminders to himself not to speak too quickly, not to indulge the desire to show off his knowledge, not to grow impatient when people did not understand him the first time, not to be irritable in the morning when he did not want to get up. These are not the reminders of a naturally tranquil man. They are the discipline of a man who knew his tendencies and worked against them. Galen, who observed Marcus Aurelius at close range, wrote that the emperor had a quick intelligence and with it a quick irritability. He could see clearly, and what he saw clearly was often other people's errors which he had to consciously choose not to announce. The Meditations are, among other things, a record of that choosing, of the restraint that made inner peace possible. Restraint, for the Stoics, was not suppression. The difference is significant. Suppression is the refusal to acknowledge what you feel. You feel the anger and pretend you do not. The feeling goes underground and emerges elsewhere, in tightness, in short responses, in the low-grade friction of a life lived against your own emotional current. Restraint is the acknowledgement of what you feel, combined with a deliberate choice not to act on it or amplify it. You feel the anger. You see it clearly. And you choose not to feed it, not to rehearse the grievance, not to build the case, not to let it gather momentum. The feeling passes more quickly without fuel. Marcus Aurelius came to understand, through years of practice, that his inner state was not determined by what happened to him. It was determined by what he chose to do with what happened to him. Not in the airy, inspirational poster sense, in the practical, daily, sometimes tedious sense of choosing again and again in small moments not to add to the difficulty. Someone spoke sharply. He felt the impulse to respond in kind. He chose not to. The impulse faded. The interaction ended. Tomorrow came. This accumulated, not into enlightenment, into a life that was, gradually, less agitated than it would have been without the practice. Donald Robertson describes this as prosoch in action, the practical application of Stoic self-attention to the moments of choice that arrive constantly throughout a day. Each small choice is an exercise, like lifting a weight that starts small and grows heavier as the practice continues. The muscle strengthens. The choices become, over time, less effortful. You do not need to have achieved Marcus Aurelius's level of restraint to benefit from the direction of travel. The direction of travel is simply notice the impulse. Pause. Choose. Do this once today, and you have practiced. Do it once tomorrow, and you have continued the practice. After enough repetitions, it begins to feel less like discipline and more like character. Breathe. Tonight, the primary act of restraint is letting the mind put down its tools. It wants to keep working. It wants to solve. It wants to rehearse and plan and calculate. Unquote. Gently restrain it, not by fighting it, by choosing not to follow it. The tools will be here in the morning. For now, the mind can rest. The philosopher Critic, who systematized much of the Stoic school's teaching in the 3rd century BC, wrote about what he called the continuous tension of the pneuma, the animating spirit that the Stoics believed ran through all things. He described mental alertness as a function of this tension, and mental fatigue as its relaxation. The language is pre-scientific. The observation is not. The mind under sustained alertness, the mind that has been attentive, responsive, making judgments, exercising restraint throughout a long day, is a mind that has been tensed. And tension, sustained, produces a specific kind of exhaustion that is different from the exhaustion of the body. It is the exhaustion of the attention itself, not of the raw capacity to think, but of the willingness to maintain the quality of thinking that the day required. The relief that comes when the alertness can finally relax, is physical as well as mental. You can feel it in the shoulders, the jaw, the eyes. The restraint that made the day's thinking possible is itself a kind of labor. It deserves rest. Let it have what it earned. Chapter 20. Why Small Rituals Matter. Here is the ritual Marcus Aurelius actually kept. Not the evening review in theory. The actual practice as it appears in the evidence of the meditations themselves. He woke before dawn. He wrote, not fluently. The entries show a mind wrestling, repeating, revising. Sometimes a single idea appears 3 times in a week's worth of entries, suggesting he felt he had not yet understood it well enough to put it down. In the evening, he reviewed the day, briefly, not with elaborate procedure. A few questions, held quietly. What did I do well? Where did I fall short? What would I do differently? He went to sleep, and then the next morning he began again. No single morning was transformative. No single evening review produced lasting insight. The power was entirely in the repetition. Pierre Hadot, studying these rituals across the full arc of the meditations, wrote that what Marcus was practicing was not philosophy as intellectual exercise, but philosophy as spiritual formation. The small daily rituals, morning preparation, evening review, the practice of assent, the view from above, were not means to an end. They were the practice. The doing of them was the transformation. This is a difficult thing to believe in a world that has been trained to expect large results from large interventions. We expect the retreat to change us, the book to unlock something, the breakthrough conversation to shift the fundamental axis of our inner life. And sometimes these things help. But what actually changes the inner life consistently and sustainably is the small thing done daily. James Clear in the modern era has documented this with the precision of a researcher. Small habits compounded over time produce outcomes that large interventions rarely match. Not because the large interventions are without value, but because the small habits are there every day, adding their fraction. The Stoics knew this 2,000 years before the data. Marcus Aurelius did not write the meditations to transform himself. He wrote them to stay the course, to maintain what he had built over years of practice, to keep the needle pointing in the direction he had chosen. The small ritual of the evening review, a few minutes in the dark before sleep, is not going to produce enlightenment by next Tuesday. But practice for a year, it will produce a self that is slightly more honest, slightly less reactive, slightly more capable of distinguishing what is yours from what is not, what is worth your suffering from what is not. And that self, 1 year from tonight, will have a better relationship with sleep, because the night will no longer be a place where everything unexamined accumulates. It will be a place where the examination has already happened. Small rituals matter because life is made of small moments, not large ones. The large moments are rare and uncontrollable. The small ones arrive every day and are entirely within your reach. Your breathing, right now, is a small moment. Your willingness to be here, in the dark, attending, that is a small moment. Marcus Aurelius kept his lamp burning on the Danube, not because he had something important to write on any particular night, because he had committed to showing up to the page. The showing up is the ritual. The ritual is the practice. The practice is the life. Marcus Aurelius showed up to the journal on the Danube frontier the way a soldier shows up to training. Not when the conditions were ideal, not when he felt inspired. In the tent, in the cold, after the difficult days and the days that had simply been long. The meditations span more than a decade of his reign. The quality of the writing varies considerably. Some entries are formal, carefully argued. Others are fragments, a phrase, a half-finished reminder. Evidence of a man who sat down with the journal and could not find much to say, but sat down anyway. The sitting down was the point. Seneca, in a letter from 64 AD, one of his last, written when he was already under Nero's suspicion, told Lucilius that the philosophical life was not about achieving a perfected state and then maintaining it. It was about the daily return to practice. The willingness to begin again each morning and each evening with whatever energy was available. The philosopher who can only practice when conditions are good is not, in the Stoic sense, practicing philosophy. He is waiting for philosophy to be easy. It is not easy. It is a daily return, which is why every return, however modest, counts. Chapter 21. Anger cannot follow you here. There is a specific entry in the Meditations, Book 11, Entry 18, that reads like a man talking himself down from something that happened today. Marcus writes about anger, about the person who has offended him, and then, methodically, he reminds himself of 10 things. That he too has caused offense without intending to. That the person who wronged him was probably acting from ignorance, not malice. That in 100 years, neither he nor the offender will exist to remember this. That anger, however justified, is a kind of punishment he inflicts on himself rather than on the other person. He was not performing equanimity for us. He was finding it for himself, in real time, in the act of writing. Anger is the passion the Stoics examined most closely. Not because it is the most common or the most destructive, but because it is the most visible, the easiest to catch in oneself, and therefore the most tractable. Seneca wrote an entire essay on anger. On the Shortness of Life gets quoted more often, but De Ira on anger is in some ways the most psychologically acute thing the Stoics produce. Seneca's thesis, anger always believes itself to be justified. It never is entirely. The event that triggered it was real. The assessment that the event requires retribution, that is, the anger's own contribution, not the event's. The person who wronged you did something. Anger says they deserve to suffer for it. But the anger does not change whether they suffer. It changes whether you suffer. By the time you reach your bed tonight, whatever anger attended the day has already lost its immediate target. The person is elsewhere. The situation has passed. What remains is the residue, the tightened chest, the mind returning to the scene, the ongoing feeling of having been wronged. This residue is entirely inside you. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it?" The cause, whatever it was one event. The consequences, if you carry the anger to bed, are hours of sleep disturbed, a body held in tension, a morning that begins in yesterday's unfinished business. Anger cannot follow you here, not because you have forgiven anyone or resolved anything or decided that what happened was acceptable, because you have decided that the residue is not worth more of your night. This is not a moral position. It is a practical one. The person you are angry with is asleep somewhere. They are not lying awake rehearsing the confrontation. If they are, that is their burden. You do not need to carry a matching one. Let your jaw loosen. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. The anger, which arrived justified, and perhaps remains so, has done what it could do. It signaled that something went wrong. That signal has been received. It does not need to keep sounding after midnight. Marcus Aurelius, after his 10 reminders, always ended the same way, returned to what was in front of him, the page, the lamplight, the task of the next morning. Not because the anger was fully resolved, but because, resolved or not, the night required sleep and the day required clear action. And anger, held through the night, produces neither. The room is quiet. Let it be quiet inside you too. The anger that remains, if it remains, has done its work. It named something real. It said, "This was not acceptable." That saying was necessary. But the repetition of the saying through the dark hours does not increase its truth or its effect. It only increases your discomfort. Seneca, writing to Lucilius from his final years, described the evening as the place where anger's energy naturally dissipates if you allow it to. The body, prone at rest, loses the physiological components that sustain anger: the raised heart rate, the tension in the arms and jaw, the forward-leaning posture of confrontation. Remove those props and the anger has less to stand on. Let the body fall into its prone resting position and notice what happens to the residue. It does not vanish, but it softens. It becomes past tense faster than the upright active version of the same anger would. Marcus Aurelius understood this as the physiology of equanimity, not a moral achievement, a physical process. Let the body assume the shape of rest and the mind will gradually follow it there. Chapter 22. Softening the Inner Critic. Remember the 2 kinds of wakefulness we named at the beginning of tonight? The first kind is the familiar restlessness, the mind calculating, worrying, running scenarios. The second kind is quieter, harder to name. It is the wakefulness that comes not from fear of external problems, but from the voice that narrates your life back to you and finds it consistently wanting. You should have done more. You should have been kinder. That moment when you said the wrong thing. The choice last year that still makes you wince. The gap between the person you intended to be today and the person you actually managed to be. This is the inner critic, and it is for many people the real obstacle to rest. Marcus Aurelius knew this voice. The Meditations show a man who held himself to an extraordinarily high standard and still did not consistently meet it. He was impatient when he wanted to be patient. He was vain when he wanted to be humble. He procrastinated when he wanted to act. And then he wrote about it. Not to punish himself, to understand. The crucial distinction which the Stoics drew carefully is between useful self-examination and useless self-condemnation. Useful self-examination asks, what did I do that I wish I had done differently? And then, what will I do differently tomorrow? These are practical questions with practical answers. They lead forward. Useless self-condemnation asks, why am I the way I am? Why do I keep making the same mistakes? What is fundamentally wrong with me? These questions have no answers. They are not designed to. They are designed to produce a feeling, the feeling of worthlessness, which the inner critic has decided is appropriate punishment for the day's imperfections. But punishment does not produce change. Research on learning and behavior consistently confirms this. Punishment teaches avoidance of the punishing situation. It does not build the capacity to do better. What builds the capacity is the warm, honest, non-shaming examination of what happened and what you would like to try instead. Winnicott, the British psychoanalyst, wrote about what he called the good enough parent. Not perfect, not always right, but consistently present, consistently warm, and willing to repair when rupture occurred. He found that children raised by good enough parents developed more resilience than those raised by either permissive or punitive ones. The same standard applies to the relationship you have with yourself. You do not need to be your own perfect parent. You need to be your own good enough one. Marcus Aurelius, for all his self-examination, rarely descended into self-hatred. He noted his failures, named them, and then, crucially, moved on. The entries in the Meditations do not spiral. They observe and redirect. Observe. I was irritable today. Redirect. Tomorrow I will try to notice the irritability before it shapes my words. That is the practice. The inner critic wants to extend the observation into a verdict, into character, into I am an irritable person, I have always been this way, the people around me suffer for it, I am not as good as I believed. The verdict is not more accurate than the observation, it is just louder. Let your jaw soften. Nothing you hear tonight asks anything of you. Whatever the inner critic has been saying since you turned the light off, it has overstayed its welcome. Not because you did everything right today, because the review is over, and the review's purpose was improvement, not suffering. You have seen what you needed to see. Tomorrow has time for what needs to be done differently. The Stoics were careful to distinguish between the retrospective examination, which was the evening's work, and the prospective intention, which was the morning's work. These were not interchangeable. Doing the morning's work at midnight, planning, resolving, setting intentions, was a form of confusion. It borrowed the night's quiet for a task that required the morning's energy, and it returned neither to their proper hour. The evening's work is completed. The morning's work will come when the morning comes, with a version of you who has rested. Winnicott, describing what he called the capacity to be alone, wrote that it was one of the signs of emotional maturity, the ability to be in one's own company, in the dark, without requiring resolution, without demanding that the interior state be other than what it is. The capacity to simply be, without performing, without producing, without improving. You are practicing that capacity right now. That is not a small thing. Tonight, the only thing left is rest. Chapter 23. The soul returns to itself. The language Marcus Aurelius used for what happens in the evening examination was, by modern standards, unusual. He called it the soul returning to itself. He was not being mystical. He was using the vocabulary available to him in the 2nd century, a vocabulary in which soul meant something like the faculty of clear, rational attention. The part of you that can watch the rest of you, the observer behind the thoughts. The soul returns to itself when the day's demands release their grip and the mind can finally turn its attention inward rather than outward. During the day, the attention is almost entirely external, other people's needs, the world's requirements. The stream of tasks and interactions and obligations that, in aggregate, add up to a working life. The self, the interior self, the one that has preferences and values and private questions, waits. It waits patiently, for the most part. It knows the day has its requirements, but by evening it has things it would like to say. The evening examination for Marcus Aurelius was the time he gave his interior self the floor, not to indulge it, not to follow every complaint or desire it produced, but to listen, to take its reports seriously, to acknowledge that there is a person in here, separate from the role, with an inner life that deserves the same quality of attention the world's demands received during the day. Jung, writing in the 20th century, would have recognized what Marcus was doing, though he would have used very different language. He wrote about the distinction between the persona, the mask we present to the world, the role we play in the social theater, and the self, the deeper identity that exists beneath the mask. When the mask is on all day, it begins to feel like a face. The persona becomes so habitual that the real face beneath it goes unexercised, unpracticed, half forgotten. The evening is the moment to take the mask off. Not dramatically, quietly, just the professional who spent the day managing appearances can, in the dark bedroom, stop managing. The parent who spent the day performing competence can stop performing. The person who spent the day being what others needed them to be can, for a few hours, simply be. Marcus Aurelius did not frame it quite this way, but the meditation suggests he found the evening writing to be exactly this kind of unmasking. The entries are not composed for an audience. They are often incomplete, contradictory, emotionally raw. A man who spoke carefully in public, in private, left evidence of someone much less certain, much more searching. The uncertainty was not a failure of philosophy. It was the soul returning to itself. The honest self, underneath the managed presentation, does not have everything figured out. It has questions, doubts, things it wanted and did not get, ways it fell short of its own standards. And it needs to be allowed to have these things, in the dark, without being corrected or improved or made to look better than it is. Let your body settle. Right now, no one is watching. The version of you that the world sees can rest. What remains is simpler, older. The self that has been here since before you had a professional title or a reputation to protect. Let it breathe for a moment. This is what Marcus found in the tent when the lamp was burning and the journal was open and no one else was in the room. Not peace, exactly. Something closer to recognition. The soul finding itself again after a long day of being something else. Chapter 24. Stoic calm in the dark. If your mind has been drifting, that is fine. Come back gently. We are still here. And the Stoics did not describe calm as the absence of disturbance. They described it as a relationship with disturbance, one in which the disturbance was real but no longer governing. Tranquillitas animi, the tranquility of the mind. Cicero used this phrase. Seneca used it. Marcus Aurelius pursued it, without always naming it. It was the goal not of the philosophical life in general, but of the philosophical day specifically. Each day was an opportunity to practice tranquility. Not to achieve it permanently, the Stoics were not optimistic about permanence, but to maintain it as a practice capacity available when needed. The dark room is an ideal laboratory for this practice, because the dark room removes the props. During the day, you can achieve a kind of surface calm through control by managing the variables, staying busy, keeping the environment organized. The equanimity the Stoics valued is different. It survives the removal of control. It persists when the variables are unmanageable and the environment is simply what it is. Lying in the dark, you cannot control much. The temperature may be slightly wrong. The sounds outside may be present or absent. The thoughts arrive without your invitation. And yet, here too, if you have been practicing, tranquility is available. Not by fighting what is present, not by willing the thoughts to stop or demanding the room be different. By meeting what is present with the quality of attention Marcus Aurelius practiced in the tent, steady, unhurried, neither clinging nor fleeing. Epictetus wrote, "Make the best use of what is in your power and take the rest as it happens." In the bedroom at midnight, what is in your power is small. Your attention, your willingness to be here rather than somewhere else in time. Your choice not to amplify whatever discomfort is present, by adding the commentary that the discomfort should not be present. The rest, the thoughts, the residue, the faint worries, the body's particular weight, you take as it comes. And that taking, without resistance, without demand that it be different, is itself the practice of tranquility. Bessel van der Kolk wrote that one of the most healing experiences available to a human being is the simple, felt sense of safety. Not the idea of safety, the felt sense. The body registering at the level of the nervous system that nothing is threatening it right now. Most nights, for most people reading this, that felt sense is available. The threats that the mind is narrating are not happening in the room. They are happening in the mind's theater of possibilities. The room is quiet. Your body is supported. The breath is moving in and out without your assistance. This is safe. Let the nervous system receive that information. Stoic calm is not achieved by the most philosophically sophisticated. It is achieved by those willing to return again and again to the simple and present fact of what is actually here. And what is actually here tonight is sufficient. Chapter 25. The world can wait until dawn. Marcus Aurelius understood something about the empire that most emperors did not. It had existed before him. It would exist after him. The crises that felt urgent at midnight would either resolve themselves by morning or require the same response that a rested version of him could provide more effectively than a sleepless one. The world did not need him at 2 inches the morning. It needed him at dawn, clear-headed, prepared, capable of the quality of attention that difficult situations require. This is the Stoic case for sleep, and it is not sentimental. Marcus did not rest because rest felt indulgent or because he had earned it. He rested because the person he needed to be in the morning required it. Sleep was not a retreat from responsibility. It was the preparation for it. Seneca made a version of this argument in the letters to Lucilius. He described the man who spent the night anxious about the next day's challenges as doubly disadvantaged. He would face the challenges without having rested, and the anxiety would have generated no useful preparation in the hours it consumed. The world does not improve during the hours you spend worrying about it. It sits there, being what it is, until morning comes and you bring your actual attention to it. Your actual attention, rested and clear, is worth infinitely more than the midnight version that runs on anxiety and half-formed plans. Plutarch, writing about men who lived well in positions of great responsibility, observed that the wisest among them had learned to distinguish between the problems that required their presence and the problems that would evolve without their help. They did not try to solve the second category at midnight. They conserved themselves for the first. This is not withdrawal. It is resource management. The self is a resource. Attention is a resource. Energy is a resource. Spent at midnight on problems that cannot be touched until morning, they are gone by dawn, when they are needed most. Whatever is waiting for you tomorrow morning, the difficult conversation, the decision, the unresolved situation, It will be better met by a version of you who slept. You know this. Not as philosophy, as direct experience. The mornings after a full night's sleep, you encounter the same problems differently. They are the same size, but you are larger in relation to them. The ones that felt insurmountable at midnight become, in the light of a rested morning, simply the next thing to address. Let your body settle deeper. The world can wait. It has been waiting before you arrived in it, and it will wait after you are gone. This is not irresponsibility. The Stoics were not quietists who believed that engagement with the world was optional. Marcus Aurelius spent his days in intense engagement with armies, with governance, with the people around him who needed things he was uniquely positioned to give. But he understood the distinction between the hours for engagement and the hours for rest, not as a luxury, as a structural requirement. Aurelius Cornelius Celsus, the Roman medical writer of the 1st century, described sleep as the primary restorative of the body's constitution. He had observed, as physicians do, that the patients who did not sleep did not heal. The body's repair happens in the hours of darkness. The consolidation of learning, the regulation of emotion, the restoration of the capacity to be fully present, these are night processes. They require your absence from the active world. To lie awake worrying about tomorrow is not, as it might feel, responsible engagement with the future. It is the theft of the restoration that tomorrow's engagement will require. Tonight, your only responsibility is this: to be here, in this room, breathing, releasing the day, allowing the body to begin its work of restoration. Everything else waits. Chapter 26. Acceptance without defeat. There is a word the Stoics used that gets mistranslated so consistently that its real meaning has been almost entirely replaced by a caricature, apatheia, from which we get apathy. The caricature: emotionless, cold, detached. The Stoic as a man of stone who has chosen not to feel. The reality. Apatheia meant freedom from the passions that distort clear judgment. Freedom from the grip of excessive desire, excessive fear, excessive pleasure and pain. Not the absence of emotion. The absence of emotion's tyranny. Marcus Aurelius was not apathetic in the modern sense. He loved his children, grieved when they died, and wrote with feeling about friendship, duty, beauty, and meaning. He was deeply emotional in a private register that the Meditations occasionally reveal. What he practiced was not the extinction of feeling, but its proportionality. Feeling the appropriate amount for the appropriate duration in response to what actually warranted feeling, and releasing it when its appropriate duration had passed. This is acceptance without defeat. Defeat looks like, this is how things are, and they are terrible, and there is nothing to be done, and I have given up. Acceptance looks like, this is how things are. I see it clearly, I respond to it appropriately, and I do not add suffering to it by demanding that it be otherwise. The distinction lives in the relationship with reality. Defeat breaks the relationship. It turns away. It refuses to see what is actually there. Acceptance looks directly at what is there, without flinching, and chooses not to fight a battle that cannot be won. Marcus Aurelius accepted the plague. He did not accept it as good. He did not tell himself it wasn't happening. He organized the imperial response, he mourned the dead, and he did not, in the Meditations, demand of the universe that plagues not exist. The plague existed. He worked within reality, not against it. This is the discipline. Not cheerfulness in the face of difficulty, not the performance of peace, the genuine willingness to see clearly and then act from what is, rather than what you wish were. Viktor Frankl discovered a version of this in the most extreme possible laboratory. What he found in the camps was that the prisoners who survived longest were not the ones who refused to accept their circumstances. They were the ones who saw their circumstances with absolute clarity and found within that clarity something that the circumstances could not touch. Meaning, even here, even now, even this. Acceptance, for Frankl, was not the end point, it was the foundation. From acceptance came the capacity to choose, even within radical constraint, how one oriented toward what was happening. You cannot choose well from a position of denial. You can only choose well from a position of clear sight. In your bedroom tonight, whatever is present is present. The concerns you carried through the day are real. The body holds what it holds. The mind has been doing what minds do. You don't have to pretend otherwise. Acceptance means seeing all of it clearly, without adding the judgment that it should be different, and then, in the space that clarity creates, simply resting. Not because everything is fine, because tonight, this is what is. And this, exactly as it is, contains a room, a body, a breath, and a night ahead. That is not nothing. Frankl noted that even in the camps, the prisoners who maintained some capacity for acceptance, not approval, not resignation, but clear-eyed acknowledgement of what was, were better able to find the small freedoms that remained, the choice of attitude, the choice of where to direct the gaze, the choice of what meaning to assign to the suffering. Your circumstances tonight are considerably less extreme, which means the available freedoms are considerably larger. The room, the breath, the quiet, the body that has carried you through decades. These are present. Acceptance makes them perceptible. Demand that things be otherwise, and they become invisible, obscured by the force of the wanting. Let the wanting rest. What is here is enough to build a night on, and a night built on acceptance of what actually is tends to produce a morning with clearer eyes. Chapter 27. Resting outside public opinion. In the 2nd century, the philosopher Epictetus told a story. A student came to him anxious about what people would say. The student had made a decision, and he was afraid the response would be negative. He wanted Epictetus's reassurance that the decision would be well received. Epictetus gave him something different. He said, "Suppose the decision is good. Suppose it is the right thing to do. Does the approval of people who do not fully understand it make it more right?" The student admitted it did not. "And suppose it is poorly received. Does that make it wrong?" The student admitted it did not. Then Epictetus concluded, "You are not actually asking me about the decision. You are asking me how to stop caring what people think. And that I cannot give you. That is a practice that takes years. The years begin now." Marcus Aurelius practiced this his entire adult life. With limited success, if the meditations are honest, which they are, he cared what people thought. He cared deeply in ways that embarrassed him when he caught himself caring. He returned again and again to the same reminders. The opinions of the crowd are vapor. What mattered was whether his actions aligned with his values, not whether they were praised. At night, this distinction becomes especially important, because the nocturnal mind, unoccupied, running calculations, often runs this one. What did they think of me today? It reviews the interactions, plays back the silences, assigns meaning to facial expressions, conducts a retrospective assessment of how one appeared. This review is almost always inaccurate, because the mind doing the reviewing is biased toward negative assessment when anxious. It remembers the moment that might have gone badly more vividly than the moments that were simply fine. It constructs an audience more critical than any real audience you actually face today. Ryan Holiday, in his work on Stoic philosophy for a modern audience, notes that Marcus Aurelius had a useful phrase for this imagined audience, the crowd. He reminded himself repeatedly that the crowd's opinions were transient, often wrong, and unrelated to whether he had done the right thing. The crowd is asleep now. So are most of the people whose opinion you have been quietly rehearsing. They are not thinking about you. Most people, on most evenings, are attending to their own concerns, their own reviews of their own days, their own imagined audiences. The opinion you are worried about tonight largely exists in your mind, not in theirs. And even if it exists in theirs, what they think is in them, not available to you, not touchable from here. Let it rest with them. Your worth tonight is not a function of anyone's assessment. It is not a function of assessment at all. You exist here, in this room, in this body, with a history and a set of values and a life that has accumulated into something real, regardless of how it is being evaluated by anyone at this particular hour. Let the audience go. They were never the point. Epictetus had a story about this. A philosopher's friend came to him before appearing in a court case, anxious about how the judges would perceive him. Should he argue this way or that way? Should he emphasize his credentials? Epictetus said, "Have you considered what actually happened? Have you thought about what is true? Have you decided what you actually believe about the matter?" The friend admitted he had spent most of his preparation thinking about the judge's perceptions. Epictetus said, "Then you have been preparing the wrong case." The right case, the one that you can present with clarity and without shame, is the one built on what you actually believe is true and right. The judges will respond how they respond. That is in their nature and their jurisdiction, not yours. Your jurisdiction is the quality of what you bring. Bring that. Release the rest. What the world thinks of you tonight is information you do not have access to and cannot change from here. What you think of what you did today, that is available. That is yours. And that honest assessment, made quietly and without cruelty, is the only audience review that will help you do better tomorrow. Chapter 28, What Marcus Did with Worry. There is a sentence in the Meditations that changes what you are looking for when you read it. Book 9, Entry 29. Marcus is writing about the future, about the mind's habit of projecting forward into difficulties that may never arrive. He writes, "Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present." This is the sentence Marcus kept for himself. The one open loop from the beginning of tonight. The sentence from the Meditations that changes everything is this one. Not because it is the most famous, not because it is the most philosophically ambitious, because it is the most practical thing he ever wrote, and the thing he most needed to hear when he wrote it. You will meet it, the future, the difficulty, the thing you are afraid of, with the same capacity you have right now. Not a better capacity. Not a capacity improved by midnight worry, the same capacity. Which means the worry adds nothing to your ability to face what comes. And it subtracts from the quality of the night you are living. Marcus Aurelius, by his own account, worried. He worried about the wars, about his successors, about whether the empire would hold, about whether he was governing well or only appearing to. He did not resolve these worries by thinking harder about them. He resolved them to the degree they could be resolved by returning again and again to this reminder. The capacity for facing difficulty is already in you. It has been there through every previous difficulty. It will be there for the next one, and it is strongest when it has been allowed to rest. The worry is, at bottom, a distrust of your future self, a belief that unless you keep vigilance through the night, the morning version of you will be unprepared. But the morning version of you will be carrying the same values, the same intelligence, the same capacity for judgment, plus the advantage of having slept. Donald Robertson, in his work on Stoic cognitive therapy, describes this as the coping self-image, the internal representation of yourself as someone who has coped, is coping, and will cope. Strengthening this image is one of the most effective interventions for anxiety. You have coped with every previous difficulty. The record is complete. Not one has destroyed you. This is not a small thing. Marcus Aurelius survived the things listed in his biography: the plagues, the wars, the betrayals, the deaths, and kept writing, kept governing, kept practicing. Not because he was made of different material than you, because he kept reminding himself, "I will meet it with what I have, which is sufficient. Let your body settle. The worries tonight have been received. The mind has noted them, and now, because the morning will bring its own clear capacity to meet them, the worries can stand down. They have done their duty." This is not dismissal. The worries were often signals of something real, a situation that needs attention, a relationship that requires care, a decision that has been deferred. The signal was useful. It pointed at something true. But signals, once received, do not need to keep sounding. A fire alarm does its job by alerting you to the fire. It does not need to keep ringing after you have registered the alert and are already responding. A fire alarm that continues after acknowledgement is not more helpful than one that stops. It is only louder. The mind's worry signals follow the same logic. They have pointed. You have received the pointing. The pointing can now stop. In the morning, with a rested mind, you will respond to what the signals named more effectively than a sleepless version of you could have done tonight. Breathe. The rest belongs to sleep. Chapter 29. The Nightly Practice of Freedom. The Stoics believed that freedom was not a political condition. It was a philosophical one. Epictetus, who had been enslaved, was more precise about this than almost anyone who has ever lived. He had experienced the absence of political freedom in its most complete form. He could be chained, beaten, sold. His body was not his own, and yet he argued, and argued from experience, not theory, that something in him had remained entirely free throughout. The faculty of judgment, the ability to assent or withhold assent from the impressions the world presented, the capacity to choose his orientation toward his circumstances even when he could not choose the circumstances themselves. This was not spiritual consolation. It was a precise philosophical claim that the most essential form of human freedom is interior and therefore cannot be taken by any external force. Marcus Aurelius, who had all the political freedom available to any person on earth at the time, found the same claim from the opposite direction. Political freedom, he discovered, does not automatically produce interior freedom. He could order anyone imprisoned, but he could not order his own mind to be at peace. The interior freedom had to be practiced. The nightly practice of freedom, for the Stoics, looked like this. At the end of each day, the practitioner would ask, "Where today did I allow myself to be enslaved?" Not by a person, by an impression, by the opinion of someone whose opinion should not have mattered, by the desire for an outcome I could not control, by the fear of something that had not happened and might never. Where did I give away my freedom? And then where did I keep it? The keeping deserved to be noticed. The moments in the day when something difficult arrived and the judgment held, when you chose not to react, not to escalate, not to add your suffering to what was already present. These moments are easy to overlook because they are defined by what you did not do, but they are real. And they are, in the Stoic accounting, more significant than the moments you are probably reviewing in their place. The Stoics distinguish between two kinds of error. Errors of commission, things you did that you should not have done, and errors of omission, things you failed to choose that were available to you. We tend, in our evening reviews, to catalogue the errors of commission, the wrong word, the missed opportunity, the moment of weakness. We rarely catalogue the errors of omission that were avoided, the potential anger that was not expressed, the unkind thought that was not voiced, the escalation that was possible and chose not to take. These are victories in the Stoic sense, quiet ones, invisible to everyone but you. Tonight, before the review closes, note one of them. One moment today, when you held, when the freedom to choose was exercised in the direction of what you actually valued, rather than what the passion demanded. You are already practicing. You have been practicing for longer than you know, but they are the practice made visible. Marcus Aurelius recorded both in the Meditations, the failures with honest eyes, and occasionally, more rarely, but present, the acknowledgement that he had held, had chosen well, had, in some small moment of friction, exercised the freedom that no one could take from him. Tonight, in the dark, you are exercising it. You are choosing not to be driven by the anxious thoughts that would prefer to keep you awake. You are choosing to be here, in this room, attending to what is actually present, which is quiet and safe. That choosing is not passive. It is the most active thing available to you at this hour, and it is entirely yours. No one can lie here and choose for you. No political condition, no professional title, no relationship status changes the fundamental fact. The attention you bring to this moment is yours to give or withhold, redirect or surrender. Tonight, you are giving it to rest. That is freedom in its oldest and most durable form. Breathe. You are already practicing. Epictetus noted that the students who made the most progress in philosophy were not necessarily the most intellectually gifted. They were the ones who practiced most consistently, the ones who, when they noticed themselves being driven by impression and impulse, chose differently, not once dramatically, but many times quietly in the small moments that make up a life. You have been choosing tonight, choosing to stay here rather than follow the anxious thoughts into the future, choosing to attend to what is present rather than demanding what is absent, choosing to release, or at least begin releasing, what is not yours to carry. These are not visible choices. No one will know they happened. They will not appear in any record. But they are the choices that, made repeatedly over years, produce the kind of person who can rest, who can face difficulty without being undone by it, who can receive the future, whatever it brings, with something steadier than panic. The practice is invisible. The person it produces is not. Chapter 30. Peace is a trained response. If you are still awake right now, let this land gently. Peace is not a state you arrive at. Marcus Aurelius did not arrive at peace. He practiced toward it daily for decades and still found himself writing the same reminders to himself in the final years of his life that he had written in the first years of the journal. Not because he had failed, because this is how trained responses work. A musician practices scales not because they will someday graduate beyond needing to play them. They practice scales so that when the music demands precision at speed, the hands know where to go without being told. The Stoic philosophical exercises, the morning preparation, the evening review, the practice of assent, the view from above, are scales. Practiced in the quiet evenings, they become available in the difficult moments. Not automatically, nothing is truly automatic, but more available, more accessible, less dependent on conscious effort and therefore more present when the conscious mind is occupied with something difficult. Pierre Hadot described this as the transformation of character through philosophical exercise. Character, he argued, is not a fixed quantity. It is a set of trained responses to circumstances. Practice the right responses long enough and they begin to feel like nature. But they are never nature. They are always culture. The cultivation of the self through deliberate, sustained practice. Marcus Aurelius, by the time he was writing on the Danube, had been practicing Stoic exercises for more than 20 years. The equanimity visible in the later entries is not different in kind from the struggle visible in the earlier ones. It is the same struggle, conducted with slightly more ease. That is what training produces, not resolution, ease. You do not need to have been practicing for 20 years for this evening to be useful. Every night you spend in honest, gentle attention to your own interior, releasing what is not yours, acknowledging what is, meeting the darkness with something steadier than panic is a repetition. And repetitions compound. Seneca, it is not that I am too old to learn, it is that I have been practicing long enough that learning has changed shape. The learning at a certain point is less about acquiring new ideas and more about deepening the habits of mind that allow the existing ideas to do their work. You know the ideas. You have encountered most of what we have discussed tonight before, in some form. The question was never whether you knew them. The question is whether you have practiced them long enough that they are available when you need them. Tonight is one more repetition. Let your body settle. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. The peace that may visit you in the next hour is not a reward for doing this correctly. It is the natural result of a nervous system that has been offered something safe to attend to, long enough for the vigilance to drop. The vigilance is not the enemy. It has been protecting you. Tonight, it can rest. So can you. Pierre Hadot, in his final years, described his own practice of what he called the eternal present, an attention to the moment that was not mystical but simply practiced. He had been studying the ancient philosophers for decades. He had written about Marcus Aurelius with more precision than perhaps anyone else in the 20th century. And what he concluded, having thought about it for a lifetime, was simpler than any of the arguments he had made along the way. The philosophical life is a life in which you keep returning to what is actually present. Not once, continuously, not dramatically, quietly. Every return is the practice. Every moment of genuine attention to this breath, this room, this body, is the thing itself. Not preparation for the thing. You are not practicing toward a life. You are practicing the life. And this moment in which you are here and attending is the life being practiced. That is enough to build on. So can you. Chapter 31. Silence after mental noise. There is a quality of silence that arrives only after the noise. Not the silence that was always there before the noise began. That is simply quiet. The silence that arrives after is different. It has texture. The mind, having been active and then gradually releasing its activity, recognizes the silence as a return, as something familiar that had been obscured. Marcus Aurelius described it in Book 4 of the Meditations as the inner citadel, the place inside the mind that the world's noise could not touch if you had built it carefully enough. He did not mean it as a metaphor exactly. He meant it as a practice destination, a place you could go through the exercises he described. When the world outside was loud and demanding, the citadel was not calm in itself. It was the quality of attention you brought to your own inner life when you entered it. The attention that said, "Here, the noise does not govern." Seneca, in one of his later letters, described an evening in his room with the city loud outside, the baths, the street vendors, the carriages. He sat with all of it and found that with practice the noise receded, not because it was quieter, but because his attention had learned to remain centered despite it. The silence he found was not the absence of sound, it was the absence of mental chasing, the mind no longer running toward the noise or away from it, simply attending to what was chosen rather than what was loudest. Tonight, the noise in your room may be very small, but the noise in the mind has been loud. The mind generates approximately 6,000 thoughts per day, according to recent research from the Jordan Poppink Lab at Queen's University. Most of them are not new, they are repetitions. The same concerns in slightly different arrangements. The same assessments of the same situations. The same questions without new answers. By midnight, you have had most of these thoughts before, probably today, certainly this week. The mind at midnight that insists it is thinking something new is usually recycling, running the same routes through the same neural neighborhoods, arriving at the same inconclusive intersections. The silence that arrives when you stop following them is not the silence of an empty mind. It is the silence of a mind that has noticed the recycling and declined the circuit. That declining is in itself a form of wisdom, not dramatic wisdom, the quiet kind, the kind Marcus Aurelius was practicing at the Danube when he put down the journal and let the night do what the night does. And now, gradually, through the hours of this evening, through the long letting go that has been happening, whether or not you named it, the mental noise is softening. Not because you solved anything, because the mind has had time to run its course. Worry has a trajectory. If you do not keep feeding it, it eventually reaches its own edge and turns back. The thought that felt urgent an hour ago is slightly less urgent now. The one from this morning is probably distant. The one from last week has taken on the quality of history. This is the mind doing its natural work. The noise diminishes when it is not amplified. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "The present moment is the only moment available to us. And the present moment, right now, contains much less noise than the mind's rehearsal of past and future. The present moment contains a room, a breath, a darkness that is neutral, neither threatening nor comforting, simply dark. And in that darkness, when the mental noise has softened enough, there is something that resembles what Marcus Aurelius spent decades building. Not the citadel itself, the approach to it. The recognition that underneath the noise something has always been quiet. You were quiet before the day began. You will be quiet again before the morning comes. The noise was never the truth of what you are. It was just what was happening. Jung wrote about what he called the self, not the ego, not the persona, not the inner critic or the ambitious part or the frightened part, but the deeper organizing principle beneath all of these. The self that persists through every phase of a life. The thing you are when every role has been set aside. He was not prescribing mysticism. He was describing an observation that there is something underneath the noise that is recognizable across decades. That the person you are at midnight, stripped of title and performance and the day's accumulated roles, is continuous with the child you were before you learned to perform any of them. That continuity is quiet. It does not demand recognition. It has been there all along, waiting for the noise to thin enough to notice it. The silence after mental noise is the approach to that thing. Let it be approached. Without hurry, without demand. It is not going anywhere. Let it have been what it was, and let the silence that remains be enough. Chapter 32. A Bedtime View from Above. One more time, and slowly. Now, take your mind's eye upward. The room you are in, the building around it, the street, the city spreading outward in all directions, its lights, its sleeping people, its particular arrangement of roads and buildings and parks that from here simply looks like a pattern. Higher, the country, the shape of it from above, rivers and coastlines and mountain ranges, all the things that seemed like obstacles at ground level resolved from here into geography. Higher still, the planet. The blue sphere that the astronauts describe with a consistency that suggests something essential about the experience, the absence of borders, the luminosity of the ocean, the thinness of the atmosphere, the smallness. Marcus Aurelius performed this exercise in the Meditations. He imagined looking down at the Roman Empire from a great distance. All the urgency of governance, the letters, the appeals, the campaigns, the decisions, reduced from altitude to the activity of very small creatures on a very small patch of a very large world. It did not make the activity less important. It made it correctly proportioned. Your life, viewed from the necessary distance, contains one day just ended, one night just beginning, one body in one room, one mind, that has been working very hard and is now being invited to rest. From altitude, small, complete, enough. Cicero wrote about what he called the view of philosophy, the perspective that comes from taking the longest possible view of any situation. Not the view of the moment in which everything is large and close. The view of centuries in which most of what seemed urgent will have settled into something quieter. The conversation you are rehearsing tonight, in 50 years, it will be memory, if that. In 100, it will be gone entirely, along with everyone who was part of it. Marcus Aurelius used a specific method for this view. He would think about people he had admired who were now dead, his predecessors in the role of emperor, his philosophical teachers, the historical figures whose lives and ideas he had studied. Where were they now? What had their urgencies produced? Not nothing. The ideas of Epictetus are still circulating nearly 2,000 years after his death. The meditations themselves survived. Some things endure. But the day-to-day urgencies, the arguments, the slights, the political maneuvers, the things that kept those people awake at night, these dissolved. What remained was only what had, in some sense, always been most true about them. This is not a reason for nihilism, it is a reason for selectivity. If you spent tonight's energy on the things that will remain, rather than the things that will dissolve, which would you choose? You probably already know the answer. The view from above makes the answer feel less abstract. This is not despair, this is the view from above. And what it reveals, consistently, is that the things that feel most urgent are almost never the things that matter most. What matters most over the long arc is this. Did you live with enough honesty? Did you treat the people close to you with enough care? Did you do the work that was yours to do without requiring the world to applaud it? These things do not resolve in a night. They resolve across a life. And a life that includes nights like this. Nights of attention, of honest inventory, of gentle release, is a life that is gradually learning to live well. Come back down, slowly, back to the room, the darkness, the weight of the body. The view from above changed nothing about where you are, but it changes the size of where you are. And the size from here is just right. Chapter 33, The Quiet Strength of Enough. Marcus Aurelius had a word he returned to. Euthymia, a Greek word he borrowed from Democritus, the atomist philosopher who had little else in common with Stoicism. Euthymia, tranquility, contentment, the state of a mind that has found a stable relationship with its own sufficiency. Not happiness, exactly, not the bright, upward feeling of pleasure or achievement, something quieter and more durable. The sense that what is present is, on balance, enough. He was not a naturally sufficient person. His journals show a man who wanted things, recognition, effectiveness, the successful outcome of difficult campaigns, the health of his children. He wanted, and things he wanted did not arrive. And he practiced returning to euthymia, to enough. It was not resignation, it was a different form of satisfaction. The satisfaction available to a person who has stopped measuring the present against an imagined ideal and started meeting it on its own terms. Seneca wrote in the Letters, "It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the man who hankers after more." He was writing about material wealth, but the principle extends. The mind that hankers after more ease, more certainty, more praise, more resolved situations, that mind is poor even when it has much. The mind that has found enough in what is present is rich in the only currency that translates into peace. Tonight, in this room, in this body, with this breath, what is present is enough. Not everything you might want. Not the resolved version of every difficulty. Not the certainty that tomorrow will be kinder than today. But a night that is quiet enough to hear the breath. A body that is functioning. A mind that has been paying attention, doing the work that philosophy asks, moving through the hours with some degree of honesty. That is enough. Lao Tzu, in the Tao Te Ching, wrote, "He who knows that enough is enough will always have enough." This sounds like a riddle. It is a description. The person who has learned to recognize sufficiency not as a ceiling but as a present fact lives in a different relationship with their own experience than the person perpetually measuring what they have against what they lack. Marcus Aurelius arrived at euthymia unevenly, impermanently, and through sustained practice. He did not solve the problem of desire. He trained a relationship with it that made the desire less governing. You are doing the same. Every night that ends with this kind of attention, without demanding more than the night can offer, without measuring the darkness against some imagined bright alternative, you are training the quiet strength of enough. It does not announce itself. It does not feel like achievement. It feels like this: a room, a body, a breath, nothing missing from this moment. Let your body settle. Enough. Chapter 34. Sleep without demanding tomorrow. One of the most subtle obstacles to sleep is a demand the mind makes of the night. Not always conscious. Often just an ambient pressure. Tomorrow needs to be better than today. The sleep needs to be restorative enough. The morning needs to arrive improved. Marcus Aurelius recognized this particular form of demand and addressed it in the Meditations. He wrote, in various forms, "Do not ask of the future what only the present can give you." The demand for a better tomorrow is a way of refusing today, not consciously. The mind is not thinking, "I reject today." It is thinking, "Today was insufficient, and tomorrow must compensate." But the compensation is not available tonight. Tonight is only tonight. And the demand that it be otherwise is the thing that makes the night harder. Epictetus taught that the greatest source of suffering is the gap between what is and what you have decided should be. Not the difficulty itself, the insistence that the difficulty is wrong. The night as it is, a room, a body, a mind, gradually releasing its grip on the day. This is what is. If you can meet it without demanding it also be a guarantee about tomorrow, the night becomes what it actually is: sufficient. Not spectacular, sufficient. Irvin Yalom, in The Gift of Therapy, wrote about what he called the awakening experiences that can come in unexpected moments. Moments when the awareness of mortality or change or the preciousness of the present breaks through habitual inattention and the person suddenly sees their life clearly. The bedtime hours are potential awakening experiences, not in a dramatic sense, in the small sense of you are here, the day happened, you survived it. Tomorrow has not yet arrived and therefore cannot yet disappoint you. Right now, there is only this. And this, simply this, has a quality that the demand for tomorrow obscures. Marcus Aurelius wrote near the end of the Meditations, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." The life that is always deferring to a better tomorrow never quite arrives. The life that can find sufficiency in this night, this ordinary, imperfect, unremarkable night, has found something that the demand for improvement is always seeking and never locating. It was here. It was always here. You are in it. Democritus, the philosopher from whom Marcus borrowed the word euthymia, wrote in the 5th century BC that the good life was available to anyone who had learned to stop measuring the present against an imagined ideal. He was writing in a world that predated the Roman Empire by centuries, in a language Marcus would have read carefully in translation. 2,000 years later, the discovery had not changed. Only the confirmation had accumulated. The psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky, in her research on what she calls the hedonic set point, found that people's baseline level of well-being was far more influenced by their habitual patterns of thought and attention than by their circumstances. Improved circumstances produce temporary improvement. Changed patterns of attention produce durable change. The Stoics said this differently, but they were describing the same mechanism. The night you stop demanding a better tomorrow long enough to fully inhabit tonight, that night something shifts. Not permanently, not magically, but in that moment, the shift is real. The present moment does not become more than it is. You become more present to it. And that presence is, as Marcus Aurelius discovered, the closest thing to peace that is reliably available to a human being. Let your body settle deeper. Nothing is owed to tomorrow. Tomorrow will come or it will not. If it comes, you will meet it with what you have. Tonight, you need only be here. Breathe. Tomorrow can wait. Chapter 35, a final moment of release. You have spent the evening in the company of a man who understood the night. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but with sustained, honest, daily attention to the practice of living well inside conditions that often refused to cooperate. Marcus Aurelius did not ask for an easy life. He asked repeatedly in the private pages of the journal for the strength to live his actual life without adding unnecessary suffering to what was already there. That is the Stoic request. Not ease, not comfort. Not a world arranged to your specifications. Just this, the capacity to meet what is real with something steadier than fear. Tonight, that capacity has been practiced. The thoughts that needed to be seen have been seen. The things that are not yours to carry have been acknowledged and set down, or at least set aside for mourning. The body has been attended to. The breath has been returned to, more than once. This is not a small thing. Seneca wrote, in one of his final letters to Lucilius, letters composed when he knew the Emperor Nero's displeasure was building toward something fatal, that a good life was not measured by its length. It was measured by the quality of attention brought to each of its hours. He was writing under a death sentence, essentially, and he was noting, with what appears to be genuine calm, that the hours he had given to philosophy, to honest examination, to the practice of equanimity were hours he did not regret. He was not performing that calm. He had practiced it for long enough that it was available to him in the moment he most needed it. That is what practice is for. You may not be writing under a death sentence. Your circumstances are almost certainly more ordinary. But the practice is the same. Each night that ends with this kind of attention, however imperfect, however incomplete, builds toward the equanimity that will be available when it is most needed. You do not know when that will be. It may not be this year or this decade, but the practice you are doing tonight will be there. It accumulates, not always visibly, not always dramatically, but it accumulates. Marcus Aurelius went to sleep in the tent on the Danube. The lamp burned down. The journal sat on the table. Outside, the armies, the river, the cold frontier night. Inside, a man who had done what he could for the day and released the rest. Take one more breath. Feel the weight of your body where it rests. The day has been lived. The review has been done. What is yours has been acknowledged. What is not yours has been set down. There is nothing left to carry into the night. Release it all. The night will hold what needs to be held. You only need to sleep. Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, was said to have kept a slave whose sole duty was to say to him each morning, "Philip, you are mortal." A reminder delivered daily that even the most powerful man in the world lived under the same conditions as everyone else. Marcus Aurelius did not need a slave for this. He did it himself. Each morning, each evening, the reminder that he was temporary, that the empire was temporary, that the urgencies of the day would eventually resolve themselves into the long silence of history. This was not morbid. It was orienting. Knowing that the night will hold what needs to be held, that the world will continue its motion without your vigilance through the dark hours, is not passive acceptance. It is accurate assessment. The same quality of assessment Marcus Aurelius applied to everything else. The world will hold itself while you sleep. It has always done this. You only need to sleep. Chapter 36. Rest beneath the inner citadel. The room is quiet now. Not the way it was quiet when this evening began. That was the quiet of a day just ended, a mind still carrying what the day had given it. This is a different kind of quiet. The quiet that arrives after the inventory, after the release, after the long, gentle work of letting the day become past tense. You have been here before. You have survived every night that preceded this one. Every worry that seemed urgent at midnight eventually became memory. Every difficulty that kept you awake eventually either resolved or became something you learned to carry differently. The record is complete. You are a person who has made it through. Marcus Aurelius wrote in the last year of his reign, when he was ill and knew his death was probably not distant, "Receive without pride, relinquish without struggle." He was speaking about life itself, the receiving of what comes and the relinquishing of what departs. Without the added weight of pride in the receiving or struggle in the relinquishing, just the clean fact of the movement. You received today, whatever it brought. You relinquished it just now into the past where it belongs. And tomorrow, if it comes, as it likely will, you will receive it too, with the same capacity you have, which is sufficient. The inner citadel that Marcus Aurelius built across decades of practice was not a fortress against feeling. It was a stable place to stand, a place that remained recognizable regardless of what was happening outside it, regardless of war, plague, betrayal, loss. You have a version of that place. You have always had it. It is here, in the room, right now. It is the part of you that has been attending tonight, quietly, without drama, without demand. The part of you that could hear all of this and let it settle rather than argue with it. That steadiness is yours, not achieved, not granted, practiced imperfectly over the years you have lived. Tonight was one more practice. Pierre Hadot wrote near the end of his life, "Philosophy is a way of life, not a series of propositions to believe, but a series of exercises to perform." You have performed the exercises of this night. Now the exercises are done. The room holds you. The darkness is safe. The breath moves in and out without requiring anything. Let your body sink. Let the thoughts that remain move through without purchase, like weather passing through a room with no walls to bounce against. Let the vigilance, which has worked so hard, finally rest. You are beneath the inner citadel tonight, not above the difficulty. Beneath it, where the ground is steady and the noise of the world does not reach. Marcus Aurelius put down his journal. The lamp dimmed. Outside the tent, the Danube moved in the dark toward the sea. The night held everything. You do not need to hold it for the night. The night is very good at this. Let it. The lamp Marcus held is extinguished now. The journal is closed. The Danube still moves in the dark toward the sea, as it has for centuries before him and centuries since. You are here. That is enough. Sleep now.